I think we're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. It's 6:02 p.m., the December 10th, 2018 meeting of the Addison Northwest School District Board of Directors. And I'm looking for a motion to adopt the agenda.
I'd like to move that we adopt the agenda.
I'll second that.
I do have one addition. We need to add an executive session as number 6 for the purpose of discussing labor relations
Would you like a motion?
pursuant to 1 VSA.
I would like to move that we amend the agenda and add an executive session to discuss labor relations,
1 VSA.
pursuant to 1 VSA 313A1B.
Okay, all in favor of that addition, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. And any other changes or additions to the agenda? All right, all in favor of accepting the agenda
Aye.
as amended? Thank you.
Stephanie's here.
All right. Excellent, okay. All right, so that brings us to public communication. So we do have a presentation from the Planning Commission around stormwater, but we also have a lot of guests this evening. So I think if it's okay with you folks, if we take some other public comment first, is that all right? Okay. So before we begin, I want to make sure that everybody has signed in. There's a sign-in sheet in the back, so please make sure that your name is on there. I guess that's all. So what do we have for public comment tonight? Yes, Emily. Please, and if you're going to speak, please tell us who you are.
Hi, my name is Emily Rooney. I'm the junior class president here at UHS.
I'm Kylie Como. I'm the senior class president.
And we just have kind of a complaint from the student body to read. We, the students of Regents Junior High School, find the recent actions of the administration of the Regents High School in regards to the unannounced schedule changes unsettling and alarming. By making such an important decision without consulting us, the real stakeholders in our education system, you erode the trust of the student body. The continued lack of an official response to students and an insistence on no conversation being held further exaggerates this issue. We refuse to be led blind into the future without any input or information. Sincerely, the student body. And we also have about approximately 175 signatures from students in high school who also support this movement as well, if anyone would like to see those.
Okay. So, yes, you can actually bring those to Glory, and we can have those on file. So, what I hear you saying is that you're feeling like you've not been listened to in regards to the proposed schedule changes. Is that?
Yes, we feel like just that we have not had a voice in the changes that have happened, and not any information at least been advertised to us directly as well. Like other people were informed, but we as students were not informed directly. We had to kind of maneuver our way around through other people and what they said to figure out what was happening.
Have you talked with your administrators about this?
I personally have not, but I know that there are several others who have had conversations, and I also believe that I thought personally that we as a student body weren't hearing any information or having a voice. Not just me personally, that's why I thought it was a bigger issue than just myself being informed.
So, as a school board, we operate through the superintendent, okay? So we don't set schedules. We hired an administrator to run the district. So there's not a lot that we can do other than accept your petition at this point. But I would encourage you to speak, all of you as a group or individually, to speak with your administrators to try to get your questions answered. And if the school-based administrators aren't answering your questions, then you would come to the superintendent and talk to her. And if there's still remaining issues after that process, then you can come back to us again. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because the schedule is really an administrative, it's a function of the administration, not the school board. But we hear what you're saying, and thank you for coming. It's great to see you all here.
Can I ask a question?
Mhm.
How many of you were at the student council meeting that we had a couple of weeks ago? Where I went to the student council and I said, I'm looking to the student council to help me figure out the best way to approach the student body?
I did hear about it.
I wasn't aware
Okay.
it was happening.
All right, so
before
I
it
just
happened.
want that in the public record,
Mhm.
that I've engaged with a group of our student leadership to have this conversation and talk about it, and we're gonna regroup after the holiday. And some of the suggestions were class meetings, or going from morning meeting to morning meeting. There is a document out there. There's a student who's doing a debate on that, and I've been in contact with her and giving her the pros and cons. She pulled the pro side, so she wanted to have a conversation with me. So there's a lot of conversation going on. We're not deliberately keeping that from anybody, but it's a process.
Right.
And the process, I informed the board in my last month's, I didn't get any questions. I added it again. Hopefully there will be some questions. We informed the faculty. We're having dialogue about how to implement that, and we're putting it in place. So there have been opportunities, and there will be opportunities to have conversations with the student body. I'm not sure all of these students are fully informed as to those efforts, and none of them have come to see me.
I personally am just here because I've had a lot of students from my class come to me, and I felt that it was my duty as class president to come and represent them. Just because they had questions. Like I said, it's not personal for me, but just having questions from other people. So maybe those are things that we can also inform them of that are going on, so that they can have conversations. I think it's just a lot of questions right now, and everybody feels that there's not many answers.
Right.
So we're getting a lot of questions as leaders of our class, and that's hard to get a lot of questions and not be able to answer their questions regarding those issues.
So I think that the administrators or maybe the guidance counselors would have some of those answers, hopefully. Is that fair? The administrators would have the answers, Steph?
The administrators certainly have the
questions,
answers,
yeah.
but the students haven't approached me directly about that. And again, I made an effort to meet with the student council. We're developing a process to communicate that to the entire student body. I'm surprised that there are a couple of members of the student council here that didn't mention that to their peers before they showed up at the board meeting.
Did anyone else want to speak on this topic or other?
Yeah, I was at the student council meeting and I thought that was
Marley,
really...
can you tell us who you are?
Oh, I'm Marley Hunt. I'm in the junior class at Virginia's Union High School. I was at the student council meeting and I thought it was very productive what we were doing and important, and I definitely think that I want to go further in like communicating to like a lot more people, because I feel like there's been a lot of talk in like classrooms and things between teachers and students, and that's been really hard for people, and I think definitely the step of like talking to the student council has been great, but I'm hoping to see a bigger step in communicating it to the school, and so I do appreciate the efforts in talking to the student council.
Good. Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, you got Kai over there with his hand up.
Hi, Kai.
I'm Kai Williams. I think with a decision like this, there are two key steps to the decision. One is making the decision, and the other is implementing it. And I think with the implementation and communication of the decision, the administration has taken steps, and it's time for the student body to step up. But I think that with the coming to make that decision for the switch to the schedule, there's been a lot of feeling that students were blindsided and didn't have a seat at the table when these decisions were being made. So it seems imposed on us and set in stone instead of being something that we can all work through.
And a lot of the closest relationships that students have in a school building is directly with their teachers. And from discussions that we've had with teachers about this, there is a general feeling that they were not being consulted either, when it's going to affect them and the student body the most.
I think it's less about the communication now and more about the communication beforehand. even though I know that's a big decision to make, and that maybe we shouldn't have had all the say in that, but I think students are feeling that we should have had more say because it is our schedule. I mean, personally, I'm a senior, so I won't be here next year, but I have a lot of friends who are juniors, and they've expressed concern to me about the classes they're planning to take for career paths and things like that. It's just a big change that obviously if we want to make, we have to make it at some point, and it's unfortunate for the kids who are in the positions that have to be in the switch. But I think the big issue is that kids didn't feel like they were questioned before the decision was made. Now it's kind of like, okay, the decision is made, we can't really do much about it, but kids are just feeling that they would have known about it beforehand, so they could have seen this coming and maybe done something about it or had a little say in it, just to feel a little bit more powerful, I guess, in a sense, like our say matters.
I hear that, yeah.
And I think there's a lot of wonderful effort by the administration to communicate about this schedule now, but most students found out about it over a month ago. So that the idea has been out without the communication about it being accepted and encouraged.
And, you know, information is really difficult to control, so sometimes it takes a path of its own. I don't know. But yeah. Jay?
Yeah, I don't know if Kevin wanted to go first there or not.
Kai basically handled what I was.
It's good to know. Go ahead, Jay.
I would just add, I'm actually really glad that the students are here voicing their thoughts, and Stephanie and I are available, you know, certainly to meet with any of you, all of you. And also, just so that everyone knows, as we're looking at classes for next year, that's when we're going to be spending more time, obviously, learning about the schedule, understanding how it works, how that impacts classes. You know, so a lot of things would become more clear as we're looking to the 2019-2020 school year and signing up for courses, which will be late January, early February, you know, into second semester when we're doing that. So we're certainly happy to have the conversations prior to that. So thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Does anyone have anything else? Yes, Una.
So I'm Una. I'm from the freshman class, and I am on the student council, and I appreciated the efforts made to like talk to us, and I talked to Ms. Taylor, and I think it was very helpful, and I went and talked to like a lot of my friends and peers within the freshman class, and everyone's kind of the general consensus seemed to be that like the schedule is kind of going to happen like it or not, and I think a lot of people see that there's going to be benefits to it, and I think just students are worried about certain kinks, and I think a lot of it was because like information came to the student council, but kind of early on in the beginning of the school year, and when a lot of us freshmen were kind of planning out our classes and looking what our high school was going to be like, we didn't have the information, and I think it just has a lot of people worried, and I appreciate the effort that's been put out to get information, and I do think like the schedule, I think it was just kind of a lack of, like a lot of rumors were circulating, and it made students feel really uneasy about what it was going to look like for them in the following years.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it is. It's a big change, and you guys are going to feel it the most, and the teachers, absolutely. But hopefully, you know, like you just said, Una, you realize that the intentions and the purpose behind it are to broaden opportunities. So, you know, it's hard to go through change. But yes, please talk with your administrators. If you have questions that can't be resolved, come and see Sheila. And please stay for the rest of the meeting. Any other public comment aside from the stormwater folks?
All right. It seems to me like either now or at some point, is somebody gonna, at least, I would like to know more about Peter Quinn, and I think his name should be acknowledged here in some way, but I cannot do that because I did not know him. Is that gonna happen?
I was going to bring it up during my student report.
Okay, so then that'd be fine then.
Good. Okay, so I guess we're ready to turn it over to the folks from the Planning Commission. So I'll introduce Shannon Haggett.
I'm Shannon Haggett, the Chair of the Planning Commission for the City of Virginia. I also have with me Mike Winslow, who's representing the Addison County Regional Planning Commission. and Dana Allen, who is from Watershed Associates. Essentially what we're talking about is an environmental restoration project. A couple of years ago, the Agency of Natural Resources did a study throughout the city of Virgins and earmarked a bunch of sites that could be potentially improved. And then over the last year and a half, we had a project going with Watershed Associates where, in addition to doing some infrastructure mapping for sewer and wastewater, we were also targeting these sites, and we started off with about 45 or 50 of them and winnowed it down to about 3 really good sites that we wanted to do some projects with. And with that, one of them happens to be on the high school property. It's the detention pond that's out over here. And I think I'll now turn it over to you guys for details. Regional Planning is acting as project coordinator, project management for this potential project. There's a grant proposal that needs to be completed by March. And what we're here tonight to do is really just inform you about this as a stakeholder, and hopefully get your support.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'm Dana Allen, Watershed Consulting Associates. We're based in Burlington. We worked on this project. We kind of helped ACRPC write the grant to do the mapping and what's called stormwater master planning. Stormwater master planning is something that the state of Vermont has been actively pursuing for the past 5 years or so in its current form. And basically it involves going around to different communities or different watersheds or sites and looking at all the stormwater management opportunities that might be there, basically managing runoff. This is important because of local water quality, so for the Otter Creek, but also for Lake Champlain. So it kind of trickles down to these communities, and what we do is we look at a lot of different sites and we eventually whittle it down to priority sites. And in this process, one of the priority sites was identified to be the high school here. There's a lot of impervious surface, so rooftops, parking lots, roadways, things like that. There's over 3 acres of impervious coverage here with a stormwater pond that was designed under an older stormwater manual. With the way the regulations are coming down now, upgrades are going to be required at some point for certain sites. There's a lot of talk of 3-acre sites, so any site, any parcel that has over 3 acres of impervious. So we saw this as an opportunity to do some planning level work. So we've actually done a concept plan, what we call a 30% concept, so we've proven out feasibility from an engineering standpoint. I also have, I'm woefully underprinted, but I printed 5 copies at 11 by 17, so not to scale, of a landscape architectural rendering, which I can leave or pass around now. Actually, why don't I just, if you pass these down, so you guys will have to share, I apologize, of what we call a stormwater treatment gravel wetland. So it's an upgrade to the pond. The pond simply holds water and bleeds it off, whereas the stormwater gravel wetland would not only pond the water, but actually filter it through a gravel media using some plants and the gravel itself to actually clean the water significantly more than a pond would. So it's definitely a little bit different than what's currently there, but wouldn't functionally look all that different. And the reason that we worked with a landscape architect on this, which is not a common practice, is that we wanted to make something that was more aesthetic, something that could potentially be educational. It could be an outdoor learning classroom. So in addition to being purely functional, it would also be an asset to the school curriculum. So that was our hope in sort of going above and beyond just designing the usual stormwater practice. So at this point, we've taken it through 30% concept design. We did have some initial buy-in from the school to get to that concept level, and the city has been working with us as well. But at this point, we'd like to basically write a grant to advance it to what we call 100% implementation design or construction level plan sets. So at the end of that design process, instead of having something that's like, yeah, this will probably work, we'll have a set of plans and details with specifications and contract documents that could then be put out to bid for construction. the way that the stormwater master planning process works and where we slot in now is that we've done the prioritization, so this is in the pipeline, as it were. We've done the concept design, so we know it's, it is feasible, it could work here. The state then, in this whole grant process, likes to see implementation drawings done as their own projects, so that would be the next grant that we would potentially write if the school is supportive. And then finally, we finish up potentially by applying for implementation dollars. So there's a decent chance that with a willing landowner like the school and a good project with a demonstrated high impact, which this could be, that there would be construction funding attached to all of this, so not this next grant, but potentially the grant beyond that. So this could be a real asset to the school with a really minimal investment. At least that's our aim. So, because we know that you guys are swimming in and are looking for things to spend money on, and gravel wetlands are one of them. But if we can save you that cash, we'd like to try. So anyway, that's kind of the overall picture. Please ask me questions. I talk a lot, so I'm happy to answer questions. Yes.
Elders,
4, implementation. We don't have a final budget yet. And I knew someone would ask me that, and I knew I wouldn't remember. So that's why I brought my report. So, and keep in mind this is for 30% costs. Oh, you have it. Look at that. Yeah, that's right. That was 170. So keep in mind that this, again, is just the initial concept. And so costs will vary significantly. So we basically put it at about $170,000 for build. That can vary depending on some of the aesthetic and educational aspects like the boardwalk and the viewing platforms and things like that. That can change costs significantly. We do build in about a 20% contingency to our budget. So whatever we think the base cost will be, we do build in about 20%. I'm almost certain that that cost will change. In fact, I know that cost will change with 100% drawings, but that's the ballpark we're looking at.
And you feel that not only are we mitigating a problem that the state perceives that we have, which is probably true, but it's also going to be provided as an educational experience for the students?
It certainly can be, and that's kind of what the next phase of design would look at. So for the initial design, we sort of said, all right, what can we do to engage students and the public? Because I think that's also important, is getting the greater public to kind of look at these features and see, okay, this is one of the ways in which we try to clean up our local waterways and Lake Champlain and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think we can definitely build in features that will help engage students. We've done it in a couple smaller scales, and it's been pretty successful.
And what percentage of the funding do you think you can get from grants?
We've seen them fund 100% construction for smaller projects. I'm currently working on a project that's about 4.5 times this budget on public property that they are funding 100%. I mean, the state's ecosystem restoration program, oftentimes a combination of ERP and the Clean Water Fund. There are a number of funding mechanisms. The good thing about this process is that you're in the pipeline, you're sort of in the database. And once you're in the database, from basically soup to nuts as far as planning to implementation drawings go, you move up in the ranking for implementation funding. So that's why we feel this is a pretty strong candidate.
So
Yes.
if we don't get 100% funding from the state, who pays the bill?
Great question. At that point, we'd have to see what the gap would look like. And again, that's 2 grants from now. So what we're looking at right now is just to do construction drawings, final permit applications, and a final cost estimate. So we would have to cross that bridge when we come to it. There are things like block grants. There's the state Clean Water Revolving Fund. So there are loan programs that can do this.
Lake Champlain Basin Program has local implementation
yes.
grants, which might be able to cover the difference. but there would be, the Regional Planning Commission could help with applying for other grants to complete that.
But ultimately, who's at the bottom, the city or the school district?
At the bottom, how? Who's stuck
Who's
with the
signing?
possible bill?
Yeah, who's stuck with it?
If there's not enough grant funding.
If there's not enough grant funding, ultimately, I mean, as it's school-owned property, I think that would have to be a conversation between the city and the school, but ultimately, I think it would come down to potentially the school. The thing is that I kind of look at this as the carrot phase, where like all these grant monies, this is sort of enticing everyone to do this work. But unfortunately, there is a regulation behind this that could be used as the stick to then say, well, okay, you have to do this. And so we're trying to get ahead of that.
Right?
What's that?
We're not to that point yet, though.
We are
right?
not to that point yet. No. That rule is still being debated, and the language around it is still being written. So we're not there, but we're encouraging organizations like the school to sort of get out ahead of these things.
But my understanding is that up in the city, they've had some mandated changes that they've had to make regarding this sort of situation.
By city, you mean Burlington?
Burlington.
Yeah.
But Burlington falls under a separate set of federal regulations
Okay.
that only apply to larger communities.
Okay.
That haven't yet been applied to Virgins. We don't. The closest thing to regulation like that being applied to this area is the state is considering going back to all properties of 3 acres impervious surface or more and requiring additional regulations. That's what Dana was saying is being debated now.
But if we're ahead of the curve, then that gives us an advantage.
Exactly.
I think so, yeah.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
We're talking about the fenced-in storm drain pond. We learned the hard way a couple of years ago that a system like that needs to be maintained, and
There is a maintenance burden.
we had a sort of a catastrophic flood when it backed up because there was a willow tree that grew up in the drainage system and all that. So would there be, that would be part of ongoing maintenance, right?
There is an ongoing
Yeah.
maintenance burden for these, and it's actually quite similar to what occurs now with the pond. The difference being is that we actually design in some aspects to these gravel wetlands, like forebays, to remove sediment prior to getting into the main cell. So it keeps them cleaner. But from a vegetation standpoint, yeah, willow trees growing into your outlet
Yeah.
structure is a bad thing.
I don't think anyone realized that the willow tree wasn't supposed to be there
Right.
until we had a flood.
So do you estimate that upkeep would be comparable in terms of cost or more?
It would probably be a little
assuming
bit.
it's done well on both sides.
Right. I guess it depends on the level of maintenance performed, but yeah, I would say comparable to slightly more, depending on. Again, if you're using this as sort of aesthetic and educational, there's going to be potentially additional maintenance on vegetation and things like that, cutting it back, keeping it somewhat more orderly than just a wild wetland.
Go ahead, George, and then.
Oh, sorry, George.
So the existing pond is fenced and looks pretty swampy. This obviously being a lot bigger and directly behind a soccer field, I'm picturing a lot of soccer balls going into it. Is this something that, when it's not filled with stormwater, you could walk in on a gravel surface or standing water, or what?
That's a good question. There's actually no standing ponded water in a gravel wetland. There is a layer, essentially, of saturated substrate, so that gravel, and then it's overlain by a muck soil, so think about like a silty mud, essentially, over the top that's covered by vegetation. So you could walk into it, but it's going to be mucky, about 6 or 8 inches of muck soils. So it's a good consideration, though, considering the fence that is there now. We're currently envisioning a boardwalk around the perimeter to facilitate the connection over to the elementary school, but also to give people something to sort of view this practice. That could change based on the need to, say, exclude soccer balls or anything else, really. So the boardwalk itself could be fenced in. There could be a fence between the boardwalk and the practice. There's a lot of design considerations that could change. So
Every time you put up a fence, it costs money.
You talked about several different series of grants. I don't know what the grant cycles are. Are these annual grant cycles? Are they 6-month grant cycles? What would we actually be looking at having to make a decision? I mean, so say today we go, yes, this is great. You write your grant, you put it in on March 1st, and then you come back to us and say, we're getting ready for the next grant, which is in X, months or years. So what are actually we looking at time frame wise?
So time frame wise, if we put in the grant for March 1st and we're accepted, then it goes out to bid as far as who's going to actually do the work. We just did the initial work where, we don't, the program doesn't sole source. So bids come in, someone gets selected, someone does the work. Probably about a year time frame from March 1st to completed deliverables for a construction drawing. At that point, then you have permits in hand, something you can construct, and you have an idea of how much it's going to cost. The ERP, Ecosystem Restoration Program grants come out quarterly, typically. LCBP is annual, right. The implementation grant is annual.
Yep.
Clean Water Fund, somewhat erratic, but typically 6 months to 12 months. So there are multiple opportunities.
But we'd be looking at construction work in summer 21.
Or
Yeah.
seeking grant funding at that
Yep.
point.
Earliest, we'd be looking at construction, at construction.
Yeah, because design work would occur over 19 and into early 20. So earliest would be
Money to do it in 20, so the early, right.
20 would be aggressive.
20 would be aggressive, not impossible, but very aggressive.
It would be, yeah.
Okay.
So what, are there costs at this level right now?
To the school?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Staff time in terms of kind of talking to us over some of these concerns such as, fencing, operation and maintenance. Those are your primary costs at this point. We're not seeking a match of any sort for this grant. Essentially, we're just saying, we think this is a good idea, we think there's merit. Can we go ahead and submit this grant on your behalf? And to be clear, if we get construction plan set, that doesn't require you to build this.
Okay, so that's what's gonna be my next question.
Right.
So if we move forward at this point, we're not committed to anything, really?
There's not a requirement per se. The state likes to have a document that says we are willing to work with this process. We have been working with this process. And your buy-in tonight kind of says, yeah, we're willing to work with this process.
Would the RFP have to be handled by us?
No, that's the Regional Planning
Right.
Commission.
You'd handle
take care of that end of it.
And who is the grant actually awarded to? The school district or to your planning commission?
I believe it'd be awarded to you as the applicant.
Yeah.
The Regional Planning Commission would be the applicant.
And so they'd administer.
So we're not tracking the
Right,
actual
they'd
cost
administer
of
on your
the-
behalf, and so they mess around with all the
Making
consultants.
sure.
and whatnot.
That's a good question. Okay, yes, Diana?
So this is a concept, so the idea of like rain gardens or those things that when you're talking about the design, that would be something that would be considered and then possibly getting students involved in some way?
We could potentially do that. We have done that in the past with bioretention projects at other schools, sort of on the design and that sort of thing. I think that we could talk about a collaborative process in terms of like what sort of features would be beneficial for teachers and students to use. Just to clarify, like rain gardens are a different practice. They're related, but it's a different practice. We sort of settled on this practice as being the most effective for this site given the soil conditions, saturated groundwater, that sort of thing. So these work well with a high groundwater table like we have here.
Any other questions on this? Okay, I guess we've asked all of our questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So we're going to be moving on to Superintendent's Report, and Sheila has a presentation for us regarding the facilities use draft. Great. Come this way. Students leave, they should stick around.
Yeah, this is what they should really stick around for.
I know. Some of them are still there. I think she does anyway.
I think I do. I think it went
want this light on?
I think you'll be okay.
Okay.
We'll see. You let me know. What do you think? You want a light off?
Yeah, can we, is it possible to do these through? I don't know how the lights work.
I think this will get a little bit brighter, but I don't know how to turn the lights on
I
and off.
don't either.
Well, we're
Mess on
working
it.
on it.
Um,
There we go.
Ooh, whoa.
That's good.
All right, that'll work.
So before we talk about what was sent out to you, I thought it was really important for me to kind of cue this up a bit because this is a really emotional topic. And I wanted to talk through my thought process in drafting this, draft. Did I put draft on enough pages? Because I think that, I have something to offer to the conversation by sharing sort of my experience going through this development. So, for starters, I want to talk about what this represents, what it is, and what it is not. So first of all, in an approach, what I did not do was create a number of scenarios from which we would all just look at a variety and say, yep, that looks good, or nope, I don't like that. And I did that for a reason. I mean, first of all, there are any number of possibilities here, and I couldn't possibly have developed something comprehensive and inclusive. And as a result, the question would be, why didn't something make it into what we're going to talk about versus what did end up? And for reasons that will become obvious, I think that's where I left it. So what I feel like this offers is that it's a plan, it's a framework for an entryway into our conversations. And most importantly, I think what I've done here is highlight the variables that are in play, because everything has impacts, and you'll see all the different possibilities and the variables in this really complicated change process. And what I have done is I've provided an example for how we might prioritize what I call a qualitative change. So I've identified something I think is worth going for in this change process, and then I've kind of followed that through to the end. What this is not is an all-inclusive possible, list of all possible options for consideration. And it also isn't, it doesn't have any sort of associated costs or analysis or impacts included. Because if this isn't even something anybody has interest in talking about, we need to figure out what we do want to talk about before that level of analysis would be put into play. So that's also part of this proposal, is to talk about what we would do next. So, so for tonight, what I'm really hoping is that after we have a detailed discussion about this, or a brief discussion about this, and you can hear what my driver for change is, that we might be able to identify what are other drivers that we also want to include. And again, this will become more clear as we enter into the discussion. And that maybe from this we can identify some models, some scenarios that we do want to move forward for further analysis. So we would maybe have the facilities committee work to determine what the facilities impacts would be on any one of these change proposals. Work with the finance committee to figure out what the anticipated costs or anticipated savings might be of any of this. Sorry, I think I'm in your way. It's okay. Also working with the community engagement committee so that we can simultaneously be planning opportunities for our community to talk about the things that we are also talking about. So there's a lot of work ahead of us, I guess is what I'm saying. This is just the first step. So this is also really important, and I feel like I just want to spend a minute on this to talk about something that I think is important. So we have a gap right now. We have a gap and we have a problem because we know what we want for our students in our schools. Like, we want to provide the very best educational opportunities that we possibly can, and yet we're limited with the amount of funding we have available. So, so we are kind of stuck between this vision and our current reality, right? We have an affordability agenda to attend to. So, you know, in a process like this, or any change, oftentimes, and I think what we run the risk of is having kind of like an emotional reaction to that, and oftentimes we focus on what we don't want to have happen. We don't want that option. We don't want that to happen. And as a result, we kind of get stuck in this reactive sort of, I don't want this cycle that keeps us stuck in our current reality. And this is kind of problematic. Whereas if we prioritize kind of like something that we hope can come out of this change process, if we can prioritize that, we can talk about that, we have more of a generative mindset to approaching the problem rather than a reactive orientation of the problem. This is what I was trying to talk about when I said if we just talk about this like, we're going to close a school, so which one? We're sort of in this, well, not that one, not that one, not that one. We're just sort of in this reactive kind of, oh my gosh, mindset. And we're also only thinking about it within the construct of our current reality. We have 3 K through 6 schools and 1 7 through 12 school. So we think, okay, well, easy. Well, you know, one of our K through 6 schools should just close because we're kind of down in that current reality piece, which is just not how I deliberately decided to solve the problem. So for tonight, I ask you to sort of suspend your reactions, I guess, to thinking about this, only because these are just ideas and they're not plans and they're not all inclusive, and every option, no matter what we come up with, is going to have impacts, and identifying what those impacts are part of the process. So it isn't necessary to really sit here and say, well, that's not going to work or that's not going to work at this point, because we're going to identify all of those things along the way. So what I really ask is that folks can kind of approach this with a generative, like, what could we create from this current issue? What could we orient ourselves to, rather than sort of like experiencing this from a reactive sort of mindset. I hope you don't mind that I'm asking. But I just think it's such a difficult conversation, and I don't know how we're going to get through it if out of the gate we can't agree to some of the parameters of how we're going to talk about it. So that's why I laid this out this way. Are you, any questions about what I've said so far, or does that make sense?
Sounds good.
Sounds logical.
Okay, logical is very good. So that's like a compliment. The best compliment for me. So there are a number of variables. It's not just cost. That's a huge one. That's a huge driver. That's something really super important to think about. But every one of these variables sort of impacts all of the others. So what I put at the top of the list is, what are our educational priorities? In thinking this through, if we're going to make a change, how can we prioritize something educational and sort of work toward that in any change process? So cost is obviously an important variable. The facilities, what we have available, our 4 sites, our central office, all of those things are variables in this equation. Our enrollment projections are a variable. Many of the suggestions are revenue generating options. So those are important things to think about, because, for example, if we decide to close a building, we might be closing off the possibility of using that site for a revenue stream at some point in the future. So that's what I mean by all these variables sort of impact each other. If we close down a bunch of buildings, they're not there for us anymore. They're gone, and it would be really hard to get them back. So it's just important to think about all these pieces and how they overlap. So revenue generating options are expanding pre-K, extending care. Gloria, can you pass out those plans? I printed a copy of what was sent with a packet in case anyone hadn't had an opportunity to look at it. So if we had full day pre-K, so pre-K for a portion of the day, and then aftercare, we would be providing a service that could be, we could charge a fee for, or we could pay someone else to provide that service, and that's a revenue generating option. We get ADM for those kids. It's a fraction of the ADM that we get for other kids. They're little, so we get less. But it's revenue nevertheless, and it's also a service. Remember when I talked about this before, I talked about part of this is trying to hedge on a bet that we can get more people to move into our community. So would the fact that we have full day pre-K in our building, like with aftercare until work is done, be, you know, an important piece for some parents that are considering moving here? Possibly. The way that I've structured this, I've left room in one of our sites for an alternative school. We currently send out, I forget how many kids, I want to say like 16 kids to a variety of alternative placements, and not all of those kids could come back in this model, but many of them could, and that would be a savings for us, and could also then be tuition spots for other students to come here for the alternative school. So we'll get into the details of these things. Another piece that I included was tuition programs, different options. So there was an international school proposal in here that would be a tuition revenue stream, and then any of these things that are talking about qualitative changes, I'm thinking of those as being their targeted enrollment strategies. We're trying to be appealing. We're trying to increase our appeal to others that might be considering moving here. And then also a variable is grade level configurations. How we group kids is not set in stone. We can group kids however we want to group kids. So the fact that they are right now structured 3K6 and 1-7-12 is a variable. It doesn't have to stay that way. So those are all parts of any puzzle, any way we want to piece this together. Those are kind of all of the different pieces and parts. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So this was the timeline that I laid out in my last superintendent's report, that we're kind of like in phase 1 right now. If we want to time a change with the lease expiring at central office, which is a year from June, if we want to time that all together, then this right now is kind of our planning phase, so that when we're in the budget cycle next year, we are budgeting for a change. So this would be, you know, reviewing current enrollment and other relevant data. That's kind of what I'm trying to gather and put together for you right now. The Community Engagement Committee is on it and starting these conversations. We've done some of that. And then a draft plan is created and shared with the board and the community, and that's kind of the part we're stuck in right now. This is just a draft. We're going to continue to add to it until we feel that we have revised it, discussed it, and have a plan that we can move forward. So that's kind of the rest of this year, so that we can budget and then move it into the implementation and review phases after that. So I included some relevant data. So our enrollment has decreased by about 26%. That's the bad news. The good news is that it's actually somewhat stabilizing. Our projections show that it's somewhat stabilizing. So while we have a dip in 23-24, before that time, they're kind of hovering right in there, and it's only like a 6% decrease from where we are. So part of my thinking would be that, would it be a reasonable goal for us to try to sustain ourselves at our current level of enrollment as a benchmark of our strategies and how well they're working? Like, is that a realistic goal to begin with, is to just not even dip those 30 more students? It's just a question. But might that be a good goal for starters, you know, that we can just sustain what we have now for membership or through tuition and pre-K and some of those other options, you know, keep us up there where we are, so we aren't losing more kids. That's just a question. This was information that was shared at the community engagement session. Just sort of what's the capacity in each of our buildings and what is our current enrollment. So that's just information for you, one of the variables for us to consider. And then in the model that I kind of pulled together, What I prioritized, as I described in detail, and I'm not gonna go into that here, but why I think middle school is so critically important. So I prioritized creating a middle school model by which all 4 sites could bring our kids together sooner as a cohort. The reason I'm defining it as 5th through 8th is mostly, it could be 6th through 8, it could be 5th through 9, like those are all national definitions of middle school. It's not like a set grade span. I said 5th through 8 because 5th and 6th are somewhat combined. We kind of tend to group the students in our district 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it keeps those kids together as a cluster, which allows us to share staff through 5th and 6th grade. If we separated those out and called middle school 6 through 8, we may end up having to maintain, a teacher or 2 more to really have both of those options. We couldn't share teachers in the same way that we are right now. So I chose 5th through 8. In my model, I proposed that the middle school be located where Virgin's Elementary School is, so that the proximity to the high school was there, so that we can share staff that would have the same or similar licensure, and they would just be able to walk across the campus. That would be harder to share staff in that way if they weren't located near each other. Again, the preschool daycare option could be left in place at the remaining 2 primary school locations. As I discussed in my plan, we could, I don't want to say my plan because it's not my plan, it's just an idea. But we could create magnet schools from the remaining 2 primary schools and differentiate them in some way so that families could truly have choice across the district that's based on augmenting some difference between the 2 learning environments. This could all be, things we could create. There's the international programming piece. Stephanie and I have actually been looking into this a little. There's the Spiral International, and then there's actually one other option as well. And both of these students bring in students from China who would tuition into our schools. And we would always have a cohort from China with us, which would be amazing. I think really increase the diversity, provide learning opportunities we don't currently have, give us an opportunity to send our students there to visit them as well, which would be really amazing and also help to fill our coffers a bit, which is good. And then also the alternative education programs. So if we did bring 5th through 8 together in one building, it frees up space in the high school upstairs in this wing where we could bring in the alternative school students. They could go to school here. And the reason I think that's really important is because those kids right now are somewhat isolated, very isolated actually. They are not here on our campus. They don't interact with other kids their age. They don't have many of the same co-curricular opportunities as students their own age. They don't have a way to integrate back into a learning environment with their peers. All of those things are so important. And for them to be able to, leave their learning environment and access an art class or a music class or a PE class or something with their peers would be, I think, a pretty amazing opportunity for kids that they don't currently have. So to me, that's a huge benefit of this, and not to mention the tuition and possibility of tuition and revenue stream there. Again, if we moved middle school to the other campus, central office could locate in the A wing downstairs, which is really important for us because the one thing that I think people might not understand about central office is that it's really important that we're central and that we have proximity to the schools. People come and go to our office all day long. We process all of the bills and payments and inter-office mail, and locating us on the outskirts of town would make that more difficult. Not to mention here, there's the separate entrance, the parking, ample access for all of those pieces for us. It would be easier for people to be able to get into our office and, do their business. So that's why I prioritize that in this model. So questions just in general about these suggestions that I put together. So what I did again was kind of choose from that list of variables and kind of pulled them together in a way. So that's what you're seeing here. It's like, here's a way we could pull some of these variables together. There's any number of other ways we can pull these variables together. This was just a suggested way to approach this to start with. Here's some enrollment data you might find helpful or useful going forward if we were to group kids in this way. 322 kids would be pre-K through 4. That is what's projected for 2021. That includes an increase to pre-K from what we have now. In 5 through 8, we would have 244 students. And then in high school, we would have 316, and then I put plus because we would have alternative school students as well as central office located in that facility. So, plus any students from the international program or whatever else, you know, that one was harder to calculate. So, this was again what I just went over, the features. So it brings all of these middle level students together to one campus beginning in grade 5, which is really important for them to be at this age developmentally with their peers. That's super important. So I think the sooner we can get these kids together as a class, the better. And then many of the other pieces I've already mentioned. Go right ahead. These were some pieces that were not variables that could be included in any.
You're actually under this model, you're putting all of the kids of an age group together right from kindergarten, aren't you?
Well, if we had the two primary schools, they would be in one or the other site based on choice. So we would have 2 K through 4s, 1 5 through 8, and 1 9 through 12.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that's a possibility.
I thought you were splitting that K through 4.
Oh, into K2, 3, 4, or
Mhm.
something like that?
Yeah.
That's an option too. Yep. The reason why I wasn't thinking along those lines was because I was thinking about the magnet school concept more, creating a K through 4, pre-K through 4 magnet school that capitalizes on an outdoor learning environment, perhaps in one location, and a STEM program in another, something like that, where we could truly differentiate the two schools, and then parents could choose which of the 2 schools they want their child to go to for the duration, or they could switch if they were not happy. But that's an option too, you know, and that's the thing, like, to sit and generate options, that's an option, that's an option,
Sure.
that's, right, so, what I hope that I emphasized is what I prioritized at the top of the list with this plan was middle school. So I started with that as an idea, and then I built the rest around that. We could decide we want to prioritize something different and then build the rest of the model around that, right? So I'm looking for feedback, I guess, in terms of what other ideas would we like to prioritize? Because if we open it up to just what other configurations can you think of, it's limitless. So I think the only way to really think about this is, what are we trying to accomplish through this change? And if it's just cost, if cost is the primary driver, that's fine. We should call that out, but then we should sort of factor in how any sort of revenue generating options might impact the bottom line. So.
Do you have a real anticipation that you can draw in tuition students from other programs?
For the high school?
To fit this model?
I do. So for sure with the international exchange program, because area high schools in the state are already doing that. So I know we could do that. What is less clear, and would be more of a, you know, we'd have to find out, is can we actually draw people into our town. Like, they want to live here because we have 2 magnet schools, or they want to live here because we have a pre-K program or an amazing middle school. That's less clear.
That's gonna take time.
It is going to take time.
I have no idea what's entailed in putting together a magnet school. I mean, is that, how much professional development's involved, is that a fairly straightforward process, or is it actually like a 10-year process?
I don't think it's a 10-year process at all. I think what we would start with is something quite small, and that would be to say, like, is there some already easily articulated way to differentiate these 2 schools? Like, Ferrisburg has an amazing outdoor learning classroom. That might be a starting spot, something like that. And then build on that. So I wouldn't, out of the gate, I wouldn't do something that's not a natural fit. Like, for example, decide we're going to do Spanish language immersion or something in one of our schools, because that is a tall order. Then we have to find Spanish-speaking pre-K through 4th grade teachers that are licensed in elementary education. Like, that's super complicated. I don't know that I would want to start with something quite that difficult. But starting with a subject area like science seems like a natural fit. Or offering world language in one school and building around that, where we might not have the very same thing in another school.
Do the endorsements, the teaching endorsements to have a middle school, are those already present?
For some of our teachers, they are, yep. Everybody's licensed to teach the grade they teach, but on top of that, you can also get a middle level endorsement. So, for example, you're either licensed K through 6, or you're licensed 7 through 12 as, say, like a math educator. You can also be licensed as a middle level educator, and some teachers are, but not all.
So would that be, I mean, looking at the faculty we have now, and recognizing that there will be change over the next 5 years as people leave for a variety of reasons, do we think a significant professional development investment on our part would be necessary, or would that be actually fairly easy for us to do?
Everyone could do that now.
Most of the middle school faculty have been anticipating some kind of change and have been working towards their middle grade endorsement if they didn't already have it. So they're either in the process. I'd be surprised if, within a year or 2, if everyone didn't have it.
Okay.
George?
I like these ideas. I'm wondering though too, if there's more opportunity to partner with Middlebury and Mount Abe in a few different ways. Because if we want to draw people here to our 5 towns, and they're trying to make a choice, like, gee, I'd love to live in Ferrisburg or Addison or someplace, but Virginia's doesn't have a field hockey team. Or but, they don't have a swim team, or but they don't have whatever whatever they have and we don't have. I'm wondering if we can eliminate some of those buts and
I'm glad you brought that up, because the CBSA, the Superintendent Association in our region, has been organizing discussions, including our high school principals and our directors of learning or curriculum directors, for that very same reason. We all won't be able to afford ourselves into the future, so we are going to need to be strategic about what we offer. If we're all trying to replicate ourselves, we're not going to be able to do it. So how can we be more strategic about the kinds of programs we offer, and then align our schedules and align those other pieces so that it's easier for students to be able to take advantage of the learning opportunities regionally? That's actually part of our bigger design, so that is something that will happen whether we make a change or not. Frankly, that work will continue, just because it makes sense.
And some of it's kind of happened. We are sharing sports teams already.
Well, but all of them,
Right.
Yeah.
No. I know I play at Mount Abe on their lacrosse
More and
team,
more,
and I know a lot of people play for Middlebury's hockey team.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, there's
Football
some,
team.
Yeah.
Right.
but not all.
Right.
So let's eliminate those, exceptions if we can.
Yeah. and school choice is an option at the secondary level, which is helpful.
Within,
That wasn't
there's
always the
limits,
case.
there's limits to both of the sports exchanges and the school choice, yeah, yeah. Alder, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering about the magnet school ideas you were talking about specifically, I know this is just concept, one being like outside education, one being more STEM focused. Does that really affect kids that much at that age?
Does it affect them in what way?
Sorry, I'm not being very articulate.
No, I'm just mean, like, what are you thinking? Like,
Yeah.
would it make a difference to them? Do they care? Is that what you're
Anything like pre-Walden or something like that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like, does it really matter in the long term that, like, a student is more STEM focused in K through 4 than being outside?
I think I'm not thinking about it like a career path, but more so a match for a learning style or a
Okay.
preference. So that their exposure to the required content is just coming in a modality that's most appealing, and maybe that has impact because maybe in those situations kids enjoy school more, want to come to school more, have more questions, are just more engaged in general. I guess that's more what the impact would be. But in terms of, over the long term, I don't know.
So it would be like the same content, just in like different
Right.
settings?
Right, so for example, not unlike Walden, right?
Yeah.
You're still working toward, national standards, you're just doing it in a different way. It's like an alternative to a traditional approach, right? What I'm saying is in this elementary school and that elementary school, we're trying to replicate those learning experiences, and I'm proposing that rather than replicate them, we deliberately go about achieving the standards in different ways.
Mark?
How complex does transportation become?
Yeah, I think
I had that question.
Especially if you have a kid in
complex.
Addison who wants to be in the magnet school at Ferrisburgh.
Yeah, that's the most complicated right there, that from either end of the extremes, but it's not unworkable. And, that, again, I think this is what we study, right? If we decide this piques our interest and we want to think about what are the impacts, these are the things we study. Is that an increase? And then therefore, any sort of cost benefit we might gain from it. Look, revenue is all of a sudden going to betcha, right? Instead of helping our bottom line. That's not a goal. So that's where we would have to go next, analyzing our roots and such.
John?
I mean, it could also be geographic. You could draw a line somewhere and.
Right, and not do choice.
Well, or yeah. If you did choice, you maybe transported your own student, which is what's kind of happening now.
Like by
right?
default, you're at this school or you're at that school.
Yeah.
That old line we
I
learned
think so,
about
yeah.
that used to be in place, and there used to
Otter
be
Creek,
a river.
yeah, the river, basically. That
That's
came
what
up
we
in
learned.
one of the
Yeah.
community group conversations.
Yeah, so, all right. I understand about wanting to be generative. But this is a proposal, all right? And a proposal requires us to be critical. And I'm going to be critical. Because there's some things in here that I'm never going to vote for. I'm never going to vote to bus the largest concentration of students out of the city. It's just, that doesn't make any sense on an environmental level. It doesn't make any sense on an equity level. This is the only community in which there are significant numbers of people with families who don't have cars. And we can bus those students, but we can't move those parents, and we're essentially disconnecting them and their youngest children from their schools. I think the transportation costs are too big, and I think that this proposal of moving kids out will do serious damage to the housing market in Virgins. The proposition to move here is a competition between here and Bristol and Richmond and Waterbury and St. Albans. It's not necessarily between here and our neighbors to the north or neighbors to the south. So I think that moving students away is a non-starter, and we should remove that out. our effort should be to concentrate and to think about going north. And as much as I would like to not do it, and I would love to keep all of these the schools open, we need, as a board, to answer the question directly: does Addison have enough students and families to move there into the future? And we need to answer the question. We need to ask it, because everybody is talking about it, and we've ignored it for a really long time. I have too. I would like to ignore it. So, you know, I don't know if anybody saw the 7 Days article last week. I mean, where people are moving, the movement is to inner cities or urban centers and north. And we need to take that very seriously if we want to be a place that brings young families in. And I just think the calculus for moving to Virgins, and Virgins growing and booming is really good for all of our towns. It's the city center, and the equation of moving here, we would be changing an important equation. People move here expecting that they're going to have their children here and their life is going to be self-contained in this place. If we rearrange that, you're talking about an illogical choice. You're going to move here, but your kids got to go someplace else. So I'm not sure where we are, because I read that as a proposal. You know, I don't think there was any way to not read 3 and 4 as a proposal. So, and I also, I think we're a little early here. We moved a little too quickly. The Community Engagement Committee had not even done that second survey. I mean, we hadn't even collected the information. So I'm really a little confused about where we are and where we're going and how we're going to have that conversation, because I don't think it can be generative anymore. Choices are on the table. We need to deal with them.
So, okay. All right, Diana?
Well, John, I am gonna say something different. I think that we have been playing at middle school for a lot of years, but we've had middle school kids in our elementary schools, and we've had middle school kids here. And they really, I was very taken by what you wrote about brain development and the whole concept of middle school. And I've been asking that question for a couple of years. As a board member, what is our commitment to middle school? And I've gotten different answers. So I think that's very exciting. And so with all due respect, John, I hear what you're saying, and I'm just thinking about it a little bit differently.
First of all, I don't, this is not a proposal. This is a bunch of ideas that we can take or leave or reconfigure or decide. But it served its purpose in that it's going to launch us into a conversation, which is what we really need to do.
Right.
So if we don't ever talk about these ideas as a group ever again, at least I think I've surfaced the variables that we can consider in moving forward. So for example, any other proposal, well, where does that leave us with this variable or that variable that were sort of factored into this proposal? So that's what I was trying to do, is put out all the variables. The other piece that I would say is that 20 years ago I lived in Waterbury when Waterbury Elementary School and Duxbury Elementary School closed. So Waterbury, very much like Virgins, is a community where you walk to your school, K through 6. And Duxbury, too, was a small little town, and everyone pretty much could walk to that school. And they closed both of those schools and reopened Thatcherbrook Primary School and Crosserbrook Middle School. So K through 4 is on one end of town, 5 through 8 is on another end of town. So it changed things for people. So it's not an insurmountable thing to have to experience that your child goes to 2 different schools in their K-8 career, one of which you could walk to, the other which you can't. It's not like they're going away forever in this model. They just, as pre-K through 4, are not in that school, right? In 5th grade, they're back. It's not as if the school is closing. So I see that differently.
Well, I mean, I guess the other thing too is if we're going to concentrate students, that means students are moving, right? It's just a question of
Right.
which students are moving where.
Right.
Sorry, George, first.
I think that part of what started this whole thing is the anticipated change in the central office location, and that's driven by the end of the lease. So if we're going to do something at that point, we have to start talking about it now. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that that maybe was one of the pushers that got you thinking in this general direction.
Absolutely.
If you look at the sheet that was passed out to you, in 14-year period from 2000 to 14, Virgin's lost 5.3% of its population. So I question if people are moving to Virgin's. I know they're building houses, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the population's increasing. I think that there's some very good ideas here. And we may not find that as we dig into them, that they all work. It would be amazing if 100% of this ended up being adopted. But I think that there's certainly, this is a conversation generating thing that as we look at it and dig into the various parts of it, we're going to come up with something that we can use that's going to make us better. And I know this school closing thing is something that's bounced around, and I've had a lot of thoughts about it myself, and I'll tell you that as time passes, my position changes. And I think that if we can keep all of these facilities, that it's going to be to our benefit. I can see that there's a dollar sign to closing a building, but at the same time, there's benefits to having all of those buildings. And some of these additional ideas, you know, if there's a pretty solid thing now that if you're going to learn another language, Chinese is what you ought to be thinking about, because they're growing fast, and before we know it, we may all be talking to them. So the idea of a student exchange and international flavor certainly is not going to hurt us having that addition. Plus, we're going to have Chinese speakers on the staff in order to make that work, which provides us with an additional class that we can give to all of our students. I think that there's a lot of good things here, and we shouldn't shut down any part of it arbitrarily.
Go ahead, Christina.
Let's see, so I think much of what Sheila presented to us tonight was talked about in our community gatherings, both the first one and the second one. And I guess I just would encourage us all to, you know, we're a school board and we're a school district and we're one community now, you know, not 5 separate communities. And we have to approach where we're headed in the future as one community and try to sort through all of this with that goal, I think. I mean, at least that's what I think. I mean, I'm from Ferrisburg. I love Ferrisburg. I love the Ferrisburg school, but I'm not thinking about things like that anymore. I'm thinking about how can we create the most vibrant school district that we can, keep everything in, all the buildings in place and all the students, and make something really amazing, you know. And I don't look at it as, you know, it's hard. Virgin's is sort of kind of a hub, but I think there's going to be benefits to getting kids in different places.
Do you want to address that? Tom wants to talk as well. Do you want to talk?
Well, no, I was just gonna ask if there would be, do you think at this point, general consensus about another priority we should also detail out? And I mean, that's really what I was hoping to leave here with. I prioritized a particular model here, but if we could reach consensus about another idea to detail.
So this is based around prioritizing middle school.
Right.
You're asking, is there another?
Right, does something come
Central
to mind as
priority.
another, and maybe it is, like, determine what it would look like to go down to 3 schools or something like that. Maybe that's, reducing the number of facilities, would be a priority that we wanna investigate further and evaluate more deeply, and what the impacts of that would be.
So one thing, in part in response to John's comments, I think we can't make this decision by ourselves. Like, I mean, not just the community, but also the city and the select boards need to be part of this conversation, it would seem to me, because, John's point about who's moving and why are they moving, to the degree that might be, I mean, it strikes me that should be part of the information that we need to be considering and as a part of this.
That makes me think of the community engagement discussions that we were having, and there were a lot of suggestions about working with realtors and others, and to me, I wonder if that could be something that the Community Engagement Committee could take on a bit more, engaging with other stakeholders in the community to learn, more, or help us to promote ourselves better, whether we make a change or not, right, with our realtors and others in the community, so.
Go ahead, Olin.
I think maybe for a possible another focus is alternative education ideas, because I think we have really strong ones at the high school level that I know have benefited me, and I know benefit a lot of other students. And I think that personally, I could have used that at like the K through 8 level too. And just that as a potential idea.
Are you talking about Walden?
Yeah, Walden or the Career Center are the 2 big ones, but just stuff in that vein of not conventional schooling, I think could really help a lot of students and improve like the satisfaction of students in their education.
So,
I think, I'm trying to figure out how to articulate it, and I'm failing miserably, so I'm just gonna throw it out there and you guys can figure out how to articulate it. We saw a couple of weeks or months ago our test scores, and they're not terrific. It seems like that should be a big focus, and I don't know how that works on facilities, but if we wanna bring in alternative programs, we wanna bring in international students, wanna bring in other options, they're gonna wanna come to a vibrant, educationally sound school, and if our scores are just kind of middle of the road, that's not gonna be, that's the place I'm gonna send my child halfway around the world and spend money on. So, I'm not sure how facilities use changes how we become better at educating, but those numbers scared me.
But after watching that movie the other night, it's just one piece of the puzzle.
I realize that,
Yeah.
but that's why it's not just we need better test scores.
Right, yeah.
And that's why I've been trying to get, so how am I gonna stay this? And I don't know how.
Nice if they were better, but
Yeah.
but recognizing that there's
But there is an
a
indicator
lot of
there.
facets.
I think a big part of that too is if students are happy with what they're doing, they're gonna perform better on
Right.
tests. So I think that
You're
like,
engaging in the subject matter more, so you're more
Yeah.
energized, you're more interested in that, there's this tumbleweed
yeah,
effect.
and
Yep.
I think that's something that alternative education could be used a lot for if we're able to cover the same materials in different ways to meet different students' needs. I think that would improve our test scores.
I think that we measure things the wrong way. We measure test scores instead of measuring growth. So if you have a kid who starts in kindergarten, who's 5 years behind, but gets to grade level when he's in 4th or 5th grade, that he's traveled farther than the rest have in terms of his growth. And so you can't compare the test scores at another school to another school because those kids started in different places. So you're not comparing what did the school do to somebody, you're comparing what that student started with instead. And so we just need to change that framework. And when we start comparing in that way, you could see then which school was a better school and a worse school, because you'd be comparing school against school instead of students against students. And that's conceptually very different. And that's why like towns that are really expensive to live in and have well-to-do families tend to do better, because they have students that started off better with better inputs and better everything. It has nothing to do with how well the school did or didn't do, because it's not measuring the school, it's measuring the input we gave it in the first place. If I brought you steak to your restaurant first, and I brought you cottage cheese to the other one, you probably would go to the one that has the steak, but they started with different inputs. And so I frankly just don't need to do it differently.
Very good,
Nice
Chris.
metaphor there.
Very good speech.
So what do we do next?
So the question is middle school one priority that we would like to look into further developing or costing out, or?
And to be clear, if we do that, this isn't the only option that prioritizes middle school. It's an option that configures that as a priority. There are other options that might also serve that same end. For example, defining it as 6 through 8 and bringing the 6th grade here, that's been discussed before. You know, simply saying we're prioritizing middle school doesn't mean we move them into the building that I spoke about here. So I did that because it accomplished the alternative school and some of the other pieces that I was trying to kind of figure in. But we can
And then
keep on
is
that.
alternative education
Alternative
one that we'd like to
education.
look into? Or are there other ideas
Yep.
of?
And that one's not mutually exclusive either, right?
definitely not.
Yeah.
I'd like to see looking into the arts,
Mhm.
talking about outdoors, STEM,
Mhm.
and also be interested in
Yeah.
looking
No,
at arts. So
Music,
possible
arts,
magnet
language.
school.
So some of the magnet school options could be
Yeah.
part of that, or alternative pathways.
I guess another question I have about the magnet school idea is how would that work in the middle school setting if you got two K through 4 groups that are learning pretty differently? How are they gonna come together in a way that works for both?
Yeah, I mean, Burlington does this now, so I think one thing would be to sort of communicate with them about those things, but also to think about the fact that everything's changing about secondary education right now, and flexible pathways are available when they didn't, they weren't available before. So I think we're seeing less of a need for kids to come and fit into something.
Yeah.
We're adapting our programming to meet kids where they are more so now than in years past.
And I think that's great. I'm wondering how different are these magnet schools gonna be? And is it really gonna be feasible to meld them together at 5 through 8?
Yep, fair.
Yeah, Kathleen?
So I know I'm a board member, first thing to have a conversation with you about this. So I'll keep it brief and I can talk later. But I think it's a really good question, and it's I think something when I went to high school that was a very traditional route. But now you have hypothetically 2 schools who are doing something different. So let's pretend one's in the arts and one's an outdoor classroom. So both of those students are coming with different experiences, but they're using the same transferable skills or the same kind. They're both going to learn to communicate effectively. They're both going to learn to problem solve. They're both going to learn to create different solutions using resources. So, you're going to have content that will be similar. You're all going to learn basic math functioning. How you get there might be really different. You might learn it in a musical score. You might learn fractions by reading music, and you might do it by splitting cords of wood. But you're both learning fractions. But what you both learned were those transferable skills that are lifelong, like communication, problem solving, more of the how you learn. And I think that becomes more important now than the specific content. Content we can get really easily through technology in lots of ways, but those lifelong skills, I think that's really what we have to focus on in those different models. So,
I completely agree. I'm just wondering how those students who operate on 2 totally different models are gonna come together and be taught effectively.
I also think there's huge,
Yeah.
I think there's huge value in diversity, right? Huge value in diversity. So we might not have to learn it exactly the same way. And when we get to the middle school, you might show me your way and I might show you my way. And we might have a change of thinking. So I think there's huge value in diversity.
Or there might be teams. There might be teams that have different focuses.
Yeah, I'm just asking, like,
Within the middle
if
school.
both kids have to learn math in the middle school, is there's gonna be an option that'll fit the more like conventional schooling that one kid might be good at, and will there be an option that fits a more alternative program that another kid will be good at? Are those options both gonna be available? Is it gonna be sort of like a concession by each to sort of meet in the middle about it?
So I think we're getting a little bit into the weeds of one specific proposal, although
So-
it's an interesting conversation, but.
I mean, I wrote my response, so I'll send it to you.
Okay.
But look, if we're thinking 20 years into the future, what gives us the best chance as a district, it's concentration and north. And I'm not trying to be
So
mean or
what do you
ugly.
mean by that?
Where north? Where are
We're
we
not
going
quite
north?
understanding that.
That means that the best chance that we have to grow as a district is to make the value proposition for a family that it's better to live in North Ferrisburg. We'll have better chances to get more families to move in North Ferrisburg as opposed to Charlotte or Moncton, and that will give us better chance to get more people to come here.
So what's your,
it's concentration
Because of
and
its
north.
So what's your
proximity to
propo-
Chittenden County? Or is it?
Busing students out is not concentration. Busing the largest concentration of students out of the city to other places is not in line with bringing things closer to the center and making things more simple for people to enter into the hub and build from here.
Unless
over
you
the 20
consider
years.
the hub to be middle school.
Right.
I mean, we
There's
already.
no amount of middle school
bus
talk
kids.
that is going to overcome the illogical proposition for you to say, move here because you have a choice to live here, Bristol, Waterbury, those places where you can walk and live your life and do everything here, except your kids are gonna have to leave. It's just that no amount of middle school is gonna overcome that, for real estate agents and, to build.
But we're
Okay,
building a
yeah.
district. We're not just building a
Yeah.
hub in Virgins.
We're trying to get more families to move here.
To North
In all our
Ferrisburg.
towns.
What's gonna give us the best chance to do that?
So,
That's what we're
John,
trying to answer.
like
Having a fantastic
tangibly,
school.
like, then are you proposing that we only have like I've heard it said that we could do just 2 schools. We could just have the 2. We would all fit in 2 schools, like,
I'm not making that proposal. I'm proposing that the principles by which we should think about this decision are concentrating more closely here, making it more simple in transportation, for sure. And that north towards Burlington is our best chance.
I hear your words, but I'm not quite following you. When you say concentrate, what is that? What do you really mean?
That means that more people should be moving children and families entering into
Virgins.
into Virgins.
Into Virgins.
Yes.
So you're saying bring everyone into Virgins?
I'm not saying everyone, but more. That should be the effort. This proposal moves people away from Virgins.
but we already move everyone into Virgins
That's
at
right.
7th grade.
That's right.
And I'm proposing that we start that even earlier, at 5th grade.
Yeah, but you're proposing to rearrange for the largest concentration of young people out.
So if there was a model that kept the Virgins, kids in Virgins, but also brought the middle school kids together earlier, that's not something you disagree with?
I'm sorry.
If there was a proposal that kept the Virgins primary age students in place, they don't have to go anywhere, but also brought more kids in sooner at an earlier grade rather than 7th grade,
I think the
5th
logic of
grade,
that
or
makes
6th
sense,
grade,
yes.
that would kind of align with this. It doesn't so much meet the north piece, but it meets the concentrated and less transportation piece. So is that an example of
Yeah.
something that could be, okay, that's fair.
So can I just ask one follow-up there? If, so following that point, then logically, does that lead us to closing a school?
It might. but we need to start talking about it. And answer that question, figure out what's gonna cost,
Okay,
figure out what that's gonna
So I hear
do.
closing facilities has to be one of our.
But not as the priority. What I'm hearing as
Right.
the priority is something different than that. It results in that,
Right.
but it's not the driver, so.
Centralization.
Okay, that's fair.
Yes.
Is one of the priorities about equal access as we look at our 5 communities? I thought I heard in the community engagement conversations that we've been participating in that allowing equal access and equal opportunities to all of our students, regardless of whether they're 1.5 miles in Ferrisburg or 5.8 miles in Addison, that they have similar opportunities. So if you're asking about drivers, I'm just sort of reiterating what I think I heard in community forums as a focus, because you're asking about focus. So I think that's something I had heard earlier.
Thank you.
The other thing that you need to factor into the equation is, as George points out, the most energy efficient building that we have is in Addison. And that building is in the best shape of all of the buildings. Well, maybe we move this one up the scale a little bit with what we've been doing this year, but he certainly has a very solid point that's a very good building in all respects. And there's a certain illogical tilt to talking about closing that building.
And losing that building.
That's right, because if you close it, you lose it. And I'm not gonna dispute the fact that I was angled in that direction from the logics of the number of students at one point in time. But I've come around to feel that as a district, we should make the best utilization of what we've got. And this plan actually, yes, you're gonna bust some kids out of town for a while, but then they're gonna spend the great majority, 2/3 of their school experience, back in the town. I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. And they're gonna be bused. It isn't that the parents have to transport them.
They might enjoy some fresh air out in the country.
Okay, so,
Can I
sorry.
just
yeah,
throw
go
one
ahead.
thing out? In the community conversation events that we held, there might have been one person or two that said close the school. And the majority of the conversation was about how can we keep all our schools open? What can we do to make that happen? I just want to throw that out there, because that was way more the focus and way more the energy of creating some of the things that Sheila's talked about tonight. How can we do this, this, and this, not close the doors? So.
All right, so these are some of the things that I'm hearing. So we have the idea of a middle school. We have the idea of centralizing everything. We have the idea of equal access for all of our students. We have the idea of alternative education models, expanding upon them. Maintaining all of our schools. I mean, would it be possible to cost out doing nothing in terms of facility changes or, regrouping? I
Well,
mean,
that's a really good transition to talking about the budget, because it's kind of more of
Right.
what we're experiencing right now in trying to meet, I think, that bottom line. Do nothing sort of means us trying to find this
Find
each year.
$500,000.
Do nothing probably means that we are gonna end up closing programs, having to shut down programs.
Within the schools that we
or
have in order to keep an entire
or
school
going
open or whatever.
above.
But
state
do
thresholds and
nothing
mandates.
and pursue some of these, revenue generating options is not something we've yet considered. So
Yep.
do nothing, add, toe dip into some of the revenue, and see how that works. Might be a way to not lose those 30 kids I talked about, maybe that's a good starting spot. What can we do to keep our enrollment where it is now?
So right now, we're looking for like 2, 3, 4 ideas to delve into further, correct? Is that in terms of trying to get some more information about cost and whatnot? I mean, I'll tell you, I think this is a phenomenal plan. I'm worried that we won't be able to afford it. That's, you know, but
Right.
if we could, you know. So what do folks want to look into further? Which of these ideas should we further
I
explore?
definitely like the idea of providing more care for younger kids. I feel like that if you can get someone to come to your schools early on, that we need more care for young children, but also that it gets them to come and experience a place, and if they like it there, they're more likely to come there for other things after that.
Okay.
That you could, it's a dual win-win in the sense that it's needed, and we could provide it, and it could generate us income, and it could mean we could get that student for a longer term. And so those are all seem like positive things.
Okay. So pre-K for childcare and/or childcare. I see a lot of heads nodding on that one. Okay.
I have, yeah, I think we can work on some of these.
You got that.
4, I think you listed 4.
What did you-
That's already included in some of the proposals, but I hear like sustain that, augment that, cost that out, kind of
Exactly.
factor that in somehow. And the same with the alternative, that's kind of already embedded, but maybe work to really push that, maybe a little younger, maybe a little more.
So you think you have?
I think I have some, yeah.
So will we look at this too, or just pieces of this? Is that what we're saying?
Well, I'm not sure. What are the 4 things that you're?
Well, what, I had the same 4 things that you had, like prioritizing alternative education models, expanding on that. I also heard, improving standards-based outcomes for students. I
Right,
don't know,
sorry,
that's not
Mark.
really a model.
Right, that's,
It's
couldn't
just
figure out
an
how to word it, but-
educational priority, I guess.
Right.
I guess what I hear there is just be good at, you know, schooling so that people want to come here. Hopefully we're doing that. Then there's this idea of whatever model provides the most concentration with the least amount of transportation or transporting the least number of students. So what might that look like? And then the equal access idea, sort of evaluating that and determining what model maybe makes that more of a reality. So, and then the pre-K, again, can just factor in any one of these models.
Okay.
Does that make sense? I mean, this is messy. Like, it's really hard to put your mind around it, which is why it was too difficult to simply like list out a bunch of options. It just felt like there was no framework for doing that. Like, but thinking like, okay, now the framework is least amount of transportation. That's a framework like that. Then we can figure out how many kids are transported in this model versus that model versus like, that's like a North Star. Or concentrating folks into one area, that's a North Star. So I feel like that's what we really need is to establish what we're even trying to accomplish, so that we can build
Do you come
around it.
back to us in March?
No,
February?
January. Yeah, I
Get this
mean,
rolling.
unless
You know,
we.
whatever we're
I'm well
doing.
aware of that,
So
but we're also doing a lot of, there's a lot of other stuff
I
going
know.
on.
I mean, I
So-
guess the only other thing we could toss out there, if we feel like this trajectory feels too unrealistic, we could also explore what it might look like to extend our lease for a year and not move central office at the end of 2021. It's $56,000,
How much?
56.
We've got better uses for that money.
I mean, we do, but in a $21 million budget. It's not insignificant, but it's also not a deal breaker.
Yeah, that if we had to go another year, it wouldn't be.
Right.
It might be a good plan to explore just to figure out if
Gives
that
you
would
longer
even
to
be
figure,
possible.
gives you
'cause, like,
longer to
you know,
explore all these ideas.
But I think, also, what's also true is this process has not been defined. There's not been a framework for these discussions. Like, in other places, there's been entire sort of committees bringing this together, right? Not just one person. Right. So, to me, this is just an entry point into this work, and we can decide whatever we need to decide. It would be not at all what I would want is to bring this forward and have you all go, yeah, that sounds great, yeah, go for it. Like, that's not realistic, and it's not even what I was I'm gonna throw some spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks so that we can figure out what to do next. That's really the goal here, you know?
I mean, we're looking at some potential big changes, and we want to make sure we get it right.
Exactly. So how do we have the conversation about what getting it right is? We don't know what getting it right is. We need to define what that criteria is. That's exactly my point.
I heard some
Do we
of,
need a committee?
We're not gonna make everybody happy.
We're not going to make everybody happy.
but I heard in our discussions, I heard, like, there was one lady who was talking about kind of like letting other people kind of decide. I think she felt overwhelmed in the way that you were talking about. There's just too many options, too many choices, like, and so I feel like that the way that you put it together was to give it somewhere to start, to build from or to talk from, and that I think that some of the public was looking for something along that lines as well, because they were having a hard time envisioning something because there was just too many choices and options in front of them.
Oh, just like this is the last question, it's not about the proposal, just about the timing. Why is it, given that this has the possibility of being very painful, it's likely gonna be painful, somewhere, and that people are not gonna be happy, why is it worth it to do that at the same time as the budget, when we're gonna go ask people to vote for our budget, at the same time that we're making people unhappy? What's the reasoning why we would do those together?
The artificial timeline that's put in place right now is the end of 2021. If we are not talking about this now, I can't imagine how this could come together quickly enough to be talking about any change for fall of next year, which is budget season.
It's the
Right,
following
so
budget.
if we wait till after town meeting day to start this conversation, then we have from the end of March through June to kind of, because summer, we're not really doing a whole lot of heavy lifting, so that when we come back in September, we're able to start having ready for budget, like real information. It seems to me we'd have to have a model decided upon in June, so that when we come back, we know what we're trying to accomplish. That's all, but it's a completely arbitrary and artificial. It's only based on the fact that our lease expires at the end of June 2021, next school year.
That's
So,
a precipitating factor,
Yeah.
but it just precipitates things that we've been talking about
Right.
in a variety of locations for a long time.
Yeah.
Right.
And also that our budget is becoming unwieldy.
right,
Mhm.
so,
But this
that's
isn't-
all. I mean, we can just decide we cannot push forward this big of a change in that short of a time frame. Therefore, we need to make a plan for central office for the end of June 2021 and figure this out, sort of separate and aside, decouple those things and solve those problems independent of one another.
But it's a
Does that make
conversation
sense?
that needs to be had, because there's been questions about why, you know,
Why do we pay
given our
this?
building
Yeah,
use,
yeah.
percentage use, why are we leasing another space?
Plus, we're having these community conversations. I think
Yeah.
something has to come out of them at
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
point.
You're
I think
right.
I think
people
we
are
can have
expecting
them
that.
and then just go away and have it be business
Yeah.
as usual.
Another year goes by and we've done nothing. I
Mhm.
mean, it's, doesn't
Right.
seem like that's,
And it seems like these are all things that have been talked about. It's a bringing together of all of the things that have been under discussion. Maybe with a little different slant, but I think that you've captured the overall feeling of the board and of the community that something has to change. And I think you've got a good group of points for discussion.
I think John does have a good point with the anger that's gonna flow out when we had a couple of teachers move between Addison and Ferrisburg. We were inundated.
Well,
We're
like
gonna
Lori's-
move 300 kids out of,
I mean, like Lori said, you're
we're not
not
gonna have enough room in this.
No matter what you do.
Yeah,
Some
it's
people
gonna,
are gonna
I
be
just mean,
thrilled and some people
this
are
is
gonna
gonna be,
not
I'm not,
That's why the
And
not
it-
saying
it's
it's a
not
bad idea, I'm not saying it's
Right.
not something we shouldn't consider.
You say that
I'm just
again.
saying it's gonna be visceral.
No, but that's why the process matters. I mean, I think that was the biggest takeaway from last last year, not that changes were being made, but that the changes weren't communicated in a way that the community heard. So more time strikes me as being not the worst thing.
Okay, so where does that leave us you'll take some of these thoughts and come back with a little bit deeper delve?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, and I think we can also look into what it would look like to extend our lease for 1 year.
Yep.
That's not a big ask, like,
Right.
to give us one whole, I mean, that seems
One
like a
whole
good
year.
gift, at this point in the
Although
process.
that was probably one of
Yes.
the key things
Yeah.
in all of the
Yeah.
conversations was,
The perception of.
Yeah.
Well, that's-
why are we renting,
Yeah.
you know?
But we don't
central
wanna
office?
retrofit a space for our use more than once, so
One time.
Right.
twice.
All right. Well, I think, yeah.
Are we at a point where you would like to have a strategic planning committee help you with
Well,
any of this, or?
So what I really feel like is that there are tasks that could be completed by the committees that we already have.
Okay,
It seems almost like we have a finance committee, we have a community engagement committee, and we have a facilities committee. Isn't it really those three committees that would be doing and we have an administrative team, and I feel like we're already the strategic planning committee, it's just,
yep,
you know, I mean, do we pull
That
the
makes
chairs
sense.
of those committees together at some point and have some sort of dialogue, how we might all work together? That might be a good idea, but to tack on a different new committee doesn't make sense.
maybe it makes sense to have the committees meet
Yeah.
strategically through
Yeah,
the
like a
process.
chairs, meeting
Yeah.
of the chairs, or something, just to kind of decide how we're gonna think
Sure.
through some of these
We'll have to
pieces.
change policy too, because it's written in our policies, the formulation of where elementary school students went by boundary
Mhm.
that matched with where we were before.
Right.
Yeah.
So we would have to change,
In the school choice policy,
in the transfer.
the transfer policy.
That's not a problem, no.
It's just,
Just
Another
like
consideration.
detail.
It's another
Yeah.
consideration.
Policy
We have
committee
to
has
pass
a
it.
role too, that's everybody.
Everybody. Right, we don't want to forget the policy committee.
That's right.
All right, well, thank you. I think this
You're
was a start, right? We had a conversation about it, and we will revisit it
Yep.
in a month. Many more times, I'm sure. All right, that brings us to the business manager.
So, if you read my business manager report, there was a couple of things that now I have a little more information on than when I was actually writing this from our conference in Killington that my business office folks were at. In day one, we were really hopeful that we had a real great chance of completing our chart of accounts transfer by the end of the week. We were not successful in that.
Sorry.
There was some little hiccups on day two that stemmed into day three, and so we're still not finished, but we did make good progress. And so we have a plan now where we are getting together once a week for a couple of hours with some designated time where we're uninterrupted to continue that work and keep crosswalking the codes and get ourselves to a place where we're ready. We've also conversed with the software company that we currently use, and we're sending them our templates so that they can start looking at how they would help us transition the codes over in our accounting program that we currently have. So that's the progress that we made there. Our audits also, I wrote something about they had not met the deadline of having us get drafts by December 1st, but they were hoping to have them to me today, Monday. I do not have them. So
Okay.
So I'll be talking to them tomorrow morning and finding out where they're at. I think they were close. They just didn't quite get them to me. And,
Auditors.
but there again, there's nothing that I've had in conversation with them about anything that makes me believe there's any change to what we already believe the audit ends with. So I'm not concerned in that area. It's just a matter of them getting the drafts together and getting them to us. I think that's it for differences from the time I wrote this. I don't know if anybody has any questions about the actual stuff that's in the business manager report.
Yeah, Larry's not here, but I have one question. The internal controls checklist,
Yes.
first of all, it's so nice to see it with just one column here.
Yes.
That's really nice.
Yeah, and we were able to do that not only because you're consolidated, like even when you consolidated last year, we still created it with the separate columns because there were cases where a different person in any given school was doing that task. So it was easier to kind of say, this person's doing it for this school, this person. Now we're at a point where we've kind of consolidated some of what the functions are, and so there's one person doing all of a certain feature, and so we could put it all in one column.
The auditors are gonna love that. So when I look through here, nothing stood out to me as being concerning, but because they're the yeses and nos, can you tell me please if I missed anything?
No.
Cause I know some are supposed to be yes and some are supposed to be no.
There, and I didn't see anything in there that we're doing that would inhibit, where we're supposed to be, or that cause concern for me. And the auditors usually take that and review that also.
Thank you for that. Other questions for Elizabeth? Yeah.
And if you mentioned this when I stepped out, I apologize, but could you interpret the end of your first paragraph where you say revenues expected to be short of budget by 91,000?
Yeah, so if you look at the revenue report all by itself, when I evaluate how much revenue we're gonna receive, I'm taking your current expenditure reports and I'm taking the total actual figures and the total encumbered figures and calculating what your revenue would be if you stopped the end of the school year as of that day. And so right now, your revenue, if that was, say today was June 30th or November 30th was June 30th, your revenues would be below the expected budget by $91,000. That doesn't mean that they're really gonna be there at June 30th because you may spend more in special education than what you have right now encumbered. And so therefore your revenue would go up. So it's more of a, as of now, if you were to close the books, that's where you'd be at right now. So if you're thinking as of that November 30th date, and you wanted to say, where are we at? You'd have this $1,100,280 left in your expenditures that you haven't obligated.
Right.
But you'd have to subtract out that 91,000, because that's revenue you're not gonna get. So you'd be more closer to the $1 million mark. Does that make sense?
It does, and we don't know whether that revenue's going.
Right, that's
It's
why
just-
it's better to at least present it in that way, because you don't wanna anticipate that you're gonna get revenue that you don't currently have the expenses encumbered for.
Sure.
So that's why it makes sense that way.
Other questions for Elizabeth?
And then I have budget stuff, if there's none on that.
Right, I guess not, so budget.
So budget, we had a very short period of time, and some of that was while we were at Killington, so we were sitting there in our hotel room, extrapolating budget numbers, making changes to the last draft that you guys all saw in the strategic budget, and trying to come down by approximately, our goal was about $500,000 in the expenditures. Ultimately, what we really needed to do was come down about $500,000 in our education spending, which that is a slightly different mentality, because whenever your expenses change, your revenues change also. So it's the education funding dollar value. So sometimes you could cut $500,000 out of your expenditures, but you might not actually end up cutting your expenditures, your education spending by $500,000, because your revenues will go down with it. And your education spending is how much does the education fund and your property taxes have to pay of your total budget, because other revenues related are considered local revenues. So when we ran through some changes that we did for this round, trying to come up with differences, we came about halfway with as far as the total expenditures. I think we were about $240,000 that decreased from the last round that you saw it to this one. And so I'll just go through quickly the changes that we made. We didn't make a ton of changes. One of the things we did is that we reduced the amount we had as a placeholder for administrators' salary increases. We reduced it by 0.25%, so 1/4% we reduced it. We updated the retirement incentive calculations for salary and benefits. We did that because we knew there was at least one more person, a fifth person, who was potentially going to take that retirement incentive. And we also estimated possible one support staff retirement, and that would be a reduction by attrition, so wouldn't be replacing that person. We had adjusted staff salary grids based on conversations that we had with the negotiations committee. There again, there was just a placeholder in there. So we had more deeper conversations with them about where we thought things would fall. We had VUHS reductions from the last version, which were suggested to us by Stephanie. These were the ones that were non-personnel expenditures, so they were things like professional services, travel, supplies, books, and equipment. Then we also had some VUHS reductions from the last version for additional work duties that were also given to us by Stephanie. We removed the new health educator position that we had added in the first strategic version. So that's not a removal of a current person. It's the removal of a to-be-hired position that was added in that strategic version. And we adjusted the special projects operations and maintenance line for VUHS only, based on the conversation we had at the last meeting where it was noticed that the rise was substantial. We were able to figure out that that line actually had a budget transfer in the current year between the supply line and the special projects line that had not gotten translated into a reduction between the two. So there was like an overlapping duplication of about $20,000 between those two lines, so we were able to reduce that in this version. So those are the only changes we made between the last one you saw and this one.
I still see though that repairs and maintenance special projects for the high school is $123,000.
Yep.
And it did go down $16,000, but I think one of Lori's questions was, I mean, do we know what those special projects are, and is that more appropriately taken out of capital projects fund?
I would say, so I would take that as almost two different questions. So I would say that when we look at what's in the special projects line, typically there are some things in a special projects that are more of kind of the what-if scenarios. There, a lot of times you're extrapolating what might happen in a given year, that there are small projects that arise or emergencies that you don't necessarily plan for. So a lot of times that special projects line does end up being something like that. But I would, on the second avenue, I would also not want to say that you always want to lean towards cutting that budget down, because some of these special projects might be just a small project in nature, and you want to kind of build some of the, you know you're going to have some special projects in every single year. They hopefully won't be the same issues as year to year arises, but there'll be something that you have to fix. And to lean on your capital improvements funds for that, the capital improvements funds is more by design for two things. You're saving money for a project that you know is upcoming so that you don't have to take out another bond. Or when you have an extreme emergency that's sizable and it's not going to be able to be covered by any portion of your budget. So that's just kind of my opinion with this, with the capital improvement fund.
But just, I mean, looking back at 2018 audit, it was only $22,000. Now granted, we put $7 million of new stuff into these buildings, but we just put $7 million of new stuff into these buildings, so.
Well, and we could have a conversation with Ken too and kind of drill in on what's in that number, what's expected. We definitely can still do that, because we're still working on the draft and we still haven't come as low as we want to. So it's definitely an area we can look at. And the idea would be, but maybe if you decide to reduce that special projects line, maybe you want to take that and budget to transfer it into your capital improvements. Because we don't have anything in this budget right now that improves upon the balances you have in your capital projects fund. You know what I'm saying? We're not,
Or
there's
put
no
another
budget
way,
to move it in.
I mean, to me, it looks like it's a $100,000 increase over the last actual. So I hear what you're saying, and maybe,
But that's only one line, right? Are you talking specifically to the special projects lines or overall to the overall O&M budget?
just that one line.
Yeah, so I just want to caution us to be careful about looking at one particular line, knowing that a lot of times maybe that the money in the previous year got spent in that special projects line, but maybe this year there's a lot more being spent in supplies or repairs and maintenance.
Well, there's
or
still
some other line. So there might be an offset somewhere, which is what we tried to look at and make sure we weren't going to cut that line when it also has been cut somewhere else, like in a supply line.
Well, yeah, but there's still 120,000 in just repairs and maintenance building, not special projects too, so that didn't decrease.
Yeah. What about the supply line in VUHS? I'm turning to it myself, but I think that one went down.
Supplies is consistent as well, it looks like to me.
Which page are you?
I'm on page
headed towards?
32.
It's 32.
Thank you.
And I-
600.
Sorry, before I go on.
Oh, I see.
So supplies does stay relatively the same. And then, yeah, we
Or
definitely
only
can.
18?
We can, yeah, we can research it further. I mean, it does. So the budget went down compared to the adopted, but not necessarily compared to what was actually spent in the FY18 year or in the current year, what's being spent. So we can look further in those lines. But we definitely want to have a conversation with Ken and have him
Yeah.
kind of go through what he envisions is in that line.
So, Elizabeth, did you say there's no money in here for the capital improvement fund?
There is no fund transfer built into here to build upon what you have for capital improvement reserves.
Because I believe that was something that we tried to agree on to do every year.
Right, and that's what I'm saying, is that if we
So that
find a
can't
reduction
happen, is what you're
here,
saying?
well, no, I think it can. Maybe if we find a way to reduce somewhere else by a higher substantial amount, but take some of that savings and move it into a plan to budget transfer for capital improvements to increase the value you have.
Right, I was just
The
gonna say,
policy.
is there,
But we don't,
I believe there's a
No.
policy.
Be
It doesn't
1%
exist
of the
anymore.
budget.
We got rid of it. So it was 1%, and that was
Right.
like,
But it is a
No,
good
no,
idea
not
to
for
think
the
about
trans-
setting aside funds
the
and
capital
building on
fund.
those
the
funds.
capital fund, it was
yeah,
1%.
it was 1% of
Right.
of the high school budget.
Yes.
So, any sort of, money that we put into capital improvement still goes into the student, per pupil spending, correct?
Yes,
Still all factored in.
it is,
No.
yes.
That's why we stopped doing it.
Right. That is, you're exactly right.
And we
That
do
is
have a
what we
number
did.
of other ideas, so it's not like we created this draft
Right.
and then said, oh, we don't have any more ideas. We actually have a number of them that, administrators and everyone have been suggesting. We just couldn't get them all put in and decided upon before you got this draft.
So are you feeling like you have enough ideas
I
and
feel like we can
including
accomplish
talking with Ken
the
and
500,000
some other
that we
things
were hoping to
You
get
think that
to
you're
by
gonna
the
be able-
January meeting.
to get there? Okay.
Yep, I do
George?
think so.
Also, I thank you for sending me the
Oh, yep.
spreadsheet
Oh, right.
about natural gas use.
Yep.
And I apologize, it took me so long to
That's
get to
okay.
it. I saw it and thought about it, and then I totally
I did the
forgot
same
again.
thing. It's okay.
My bad. But I took a look at what, I guess, EEI put together,
Yep,
I think, and I did my own calculations based on, they were using a $1 cost per therm.
okay.
I don't know if that's what we're actually paying or not, but I looked at the Vermont gas rates and looked at what I thought was the likely rate that we're on, which is cheaper, 93 cents as opposed to 101.
Instead of a 101.
So it's, yeah, so it's, I mean, it's a little bit different, and then I also, they didn't convert, and that's a 100 cubic foot rate, so you gotta convert from therms to 100 cubic feet. Anyway, the bottom line is, I think that, based on how many BTUs I think we used here previously, if we used 50,000 gallons of fuel oil, I think that the natural gas cost should be about $64,000.
See how close to you I am.
Whereas,
I did calculate it too.
I think we're at 96,000 now.
What did I come up with? I had it. I bet we're pretty close, because I think that sounds like my number.
Really?
Oh, I came to 69,000.
Wow.
So
Okay.
we're a lot close, we're close.
Well, that's less than 96.
It is, it absolutely is, so.
Both numbers are less, so.
Yes.
There may
I
be some
transposed
savings
them,
there.
yeah, they're really 64.
So that may be one that will be coming for next.
So,
next
yeah, so I have the 69. One thing that I also found, though, is that I remember this from when we budgeted, and I don't know if you remember the conversations at the facilities committee meetings, when we were budgeting for what we thought we would save in energy costs, and I tried to say this in the last meeting, but I don't think I articulated it well. One of the things we did is we purposefully split the savings that we thought we were gonna reap from the project between the fuel lines and the electricity lines. So the only thing I would say is, yes, I think we can find a reduction in the fuel consumption lines, but we wanna watch those electricity lines, because I have a feeling by looking at them myself, we're gonna be low on what we budgeted for electricity. I think we need to do a little bit of a cost shift. It's still gonna be a savings. But like, for instance, BUHS was one of them. So I came up with 69,000 instead of your 64. But with the budget at 96, that would mean reducing that cost in this budget to by $27,000 in the natural gas line. But on the same front, when I looked at electricity and I compared it to what we're actually spending and even what we spent in FY18 and just trying to extrapolate, and then what we budgeted with those savings in mind, we actually look like we are low by probably $10,000 or slightly more. So in our budget. So when we cost shift, we don't want to reduce the entire budget by 27,000, maybe 17,000 or whatever. That's just my, and it happens the same way with BUES a little bit.
Yeah, smaller numbers.
Yeah, smaller numbers.
I'm very glad we have you on this.
I'm glad to see it was, my numbers were kind of confirmed
Yeah,
by what
no,
he
that's-
did, though. That's
actually
awesome.
very impressive.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So you guys feel like you have a number of areas
I
that
think
you're
we
gonna
have a number of
to
areas.
explore
That's one of them.
and
We'll
bring us
look at the
in-
special projects again,
Update,
maybe
yes.
with offsetting it a little bit to, you know, I don't know what people think is reasonable to try to put into a capital improvements fund. But, we'll try to come up with something. But we've got a number of other changes that other people have suggested, so.
Something more than nothing, right?
Oh, just one of the things that's not here that was there is the health instructor. Is that gonna allow us to meet the continuous improvement plan? I mean, it's been a deficit for us, right? We haven't been,
Right.
we
We
haven't
haven't been
been
providing
meeting the mark.
It's just, it was an ad that we decided not to add.
So we're gonna continue to not meet that mark?
Well, yes and no, so it's always been a deficit, and those health education needs are being met through the classroom teacher, and there's like, the guidance counselor, like there's other people that are providing instruction. They're not licensed in the area of health, so technically speaking, they shouldn't be teaching health. They're not health educators, which is why we put it in as an ad, but, we just decided not to add it at this time, given our present situation.
Well,
So
I'm
we'll
just saying,
continue to meet the needs in the same way we have been.
We could, given our situation, I agree, I understand, but we could prioritize it over something else if we need to.
Yep.
And we could talk about that, or no, or do you feel
Yeah, you can.
confident we'll meet the needs of our students' health?
We'll continue to address that the same way we have been,
Okay.
which is not to not teach it, just to teach it differently. Yeah,
And it doesn't mean we won't look at it the following budget year all over again
right.
and try to do something different.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, well. I mean, it's a good answer, yes, I understand.
Okay. Well, maybe
I
if they end up
think that's
finding even
what-
more money, they can add it back in.
I do have
Yeah.
one more thing. So I do have one more thing, just to give you guys an idea of where we're at as far as our extrapolating what this would all mean. Like if we adopted this budget today, which we're not, clearly, we've got lots more to adjust by the January meeting. What it would mean for like the education spending, and again, we haven't gotten solid numbers from the AOE on our equalized pupils, and they cannot give them to us because of the census information. So I'm still using my estimated number. We have gotten some information from them, like the forecasted homestead yield and things like that. So some of the numbers have come in and some of them have not. So how this calculates out when I reran revenue based on this, still using the same amount of surplus dollars from our audit, it brings us down lower so that we are closer to meeting the ceiling for the per pupil spending, but we are still lacking about $315 per student, even with our excess credits that we get for our debt that we have. So the goal is to try to come and hit that threshold and find that other $300 per student, basically, is what we're trying to do. How that reflects in your tax rate, if this was the budget you adopted and you were over the threshold, your tax rate would rise right now by 3.75 cents. So almost 4 cents, 3.25 cents, which is actually a lower rise than what you saw last year.
And does that take our reduction for consolidation?
It does. It's already got that considered in there because it dropped by 2 cents. And now the other thing to remember is that doesn't mean that every single town's tax rate will drop or increase by that amount, because then you apply your CLA. So this is the uniform tax rate that's for the whole district, that it would rise overall by 3.75 cents, and then they apply those CLAs for the different towns, and some people will go up, some people will go down, and some people will stay the same.
All right, well, we're getting there. That's much better news than last time.
Thank you.
It's closer.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry, so you said we're like $315 or something like that over
Per student.
the threshold, and is that the penalty? So in other words,
Yes, we would receive a penalty. Yeah, the penalty really is kind of one of those interesting things. I asked them to kind of explain it to me. Is there a set penalty, dollar amount that they charge you for dollar that you're over that? And there really isn't. What it means, though, is for that dollar amount that you're over that you can't give yourself a credit for, they give you credits for like your debt service and such, so that you can't get a credit for it. Your tax rate has to calculate over the threshold. Everybody else gets to calculate based on that threshold, whereas our towns and everyone would have to calculate on the dollar amount that was above the threshold also. So it really isn't a penalty, it's just you're calculating your tax rate on a higher number. I mean, it's not a physical, well, it's a penalty in one way, but it's not like a set dollar amount or a set percentage or anything like that.
we ran afoul of this in Addison at one point, and and what it boiled down to is we tried to be conservative in our estimates and in our budgeting, and we didn't spend as much on oil that year, for example. And so we came in under budget, but in the meantime, we paid this big penalty because we had been conservative in our budgeting. And so I think the lesson we took away there is it doesn't pay to be conservative in your budgeting. You're gonna pay your bills anyway, but there's no sense in paying the state a big penalty if you don't need to.
Right. Yeah. And that's why the goal is to get us not down to the, I mean, if you
I'm
saw
not
the
advocating
calculation,
for
not
cooking the
down
books
to the.
here. Be clear.
No, but it's
I'm just
tricky,
saying
right?
there's a
Yeah.
difference between conservatively putting a budget together and
Right.
being a little bit more aggressive in putting a budget together.
And that's why I'm saying, like, overall, if I come through the calculation, we're actually, even in this budget version, $1,294 over the threshold. But you also have a school district that gets a credit of $985 per student because of your debt service. So I'm not trying to bring you to a level of getting to that whole $1,294. I'm trying to get us to a level of the net of the credit versus that number. So we'll still technically be over the threshold, but we won't be penalized for it because of those credits we have. So as our debt service changes and we drop some debt, that will change, and we'll have to keep on recalculating that. Yeah.
But this,
It's tricky. It's an
Yeah.
ongoing.
this amounts to $287,000. So we still got some paring to do.
We
But
still
we
have,
have not yet put in the staffing changes that we're
Right.
already working on, and
or
that
things
was
like that fuel consumption.
deliberate, because
or-
we
yeah.
really haven't had conversations. There wasn't a lot of time between the last meeting and when this
Right.
budget packet had to go out, and there's conversations that need to happen,
Yeah.
so.
And that's what I'm saying, if we have an extra $100,000 on the special projects line, which is only gonna cost us even more money in penalty, that just makes absolutely no sense to me.
Right.
Yep, absolutely.
That doesn't have a real usage that we know
Yep.
about.
All right, excellent, thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, on to principals' reports.
student? Oh, sorry.
What?
Nothing. I thought you skipped one.
Oops.
All right, anyone have questions for the principal's report? Stephanie did point out that she included for the second time information on the schedule.
Careful what you wish for, right?
Yes, George.
What is an OT swing?
Sure, so it's a large swing that will hold a child up to 100 pounds, and it sort of hugs them while they swing, so it's an occupational therapy swing. So for kids who have a lot of trouble with self-regulation or need a calming space, it's in a separate space, and we have multiple students who benefit from it. So it's a device, it's a tool, but it's a recent addition based on some recommendations for a couple of our kids who were having more difficulty regulating. Tried a lot of strategies, and we're adding one more.
It's good to have a big toolbox. Other questions for the principals?
Just a statement, if you want to learn more about Angelo, you can watch The Spin, because he was interviewed, and kids asked many questions about what it was like to be a principal and teacher, so.
Haven't seen that edition yet. But The Spin is fabulous. If you haven't watched it, you should check it out.
Episode 9.
What?
Or 8. It's either 8
I think you were 8, 9 is the second graders.
Is 9 the second graders? They don't talk loudly. That one you have to listen to twice. And then it was captioned.
It's pretty cool, though.
Don't tell them about closed caption. I've got enough going on at home.
Okay.
Other things for the principals?
Stephanie, are there things you want to tell us about the time changes?
Oh, you know what, I want the board to ask questions about the schedule, if they have questions about the schedule, because obviously it's a topic of conversation, and, you know, I wanna be able to respond to your questions. If you don't have questions, and if the document that I included was as clear as it obviously was, then maybe we don't need to discuss it, but I just didn't want you to miss it last month.
Right.
Put down where it says
George?
here.
I'll ask a question.
Wait, George is gonna ask
Go ahead,
first.
George, you go.
I think I saw in your description that one of the cons potentially is might impact band and chorus.
Well,
Click on
right now,
where it
we
says
have dedicated time for students who wish to participate in band and chorus. It's, in most schools, it's actually a class, or it's held at different times of the day. We actually sacrifice quite a bit, because we have it scheduled during callback, which means students who are in band and chorus can't participate in callback. And students who aren't in band and chorus aren't necessarily positively engaged. That is downtime. That's true for both the middle school and the high school. Those students are able to get additional help from their teachers if they need it. But if they don't need it, it's just downtime, study hall time, or hangout time. And it seems like we've been, you know, emphasizing instruction for music to the detriment of other students. And I don't want to kill the music program. That's not my point. I don't think we will. I think there are ways to schedule it, but I think if it becomes a class, then and we can prioritize that in the scheduling system, so students will get it if they want it, and it won't conflict with, you know, I mean, there will always be conflicts, and, you know, in a school with 300 students, there will be. Right now, we've created a system where there are no conflicts for students who want to participate in band and chorus, but they don't necessarily get the extra support. We don't have a time during the day when those students can get extra support unless they grab their lunch real quickly, and then they run up for, you know, maybe 20 minutes up to Nancy's class for math. And so this way, there won't be any conflict, and it enables every single student to get the benefit of intervention, reteaching, or meeting with their teachers, because every student will have a callback period. And that's our single most important universal intervention for students. That's tier 1 instruction. Every student should have the opportunity for that, and we don't. So I'll give you the minutes. Students in band and chorus get 8,800 minutes over the course of the year, and a student in math class only gets 6,600 minutes.
What?
That's why we always use those videos.
Nancy, do the math.
Christina?
I was wondering, I've heard some of these students talking, you know, and they seem concerned about that they're not going to be able to take all the courses that they can take now because of the schedule change. And I just wonder if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, you know, we've been teaching the same classes for years and years and years and years, and we've actually aligned our we've aligned the standards to our classes as opposed to designing classes to meet the standards. And, you know, we said, oh, we've aligned, you know, integrated one to the new standards design. We really haven't done that. We have somewhat of an obsolete course sequence in some of our department areas, I think.
Yeah.
Other people agree with me, and we're moving to a proficiency-based system. Our classes should reflect that we're meeting meeting students' needs in achieving proficiency in those areas. So it's sort of forcing the point about redesigning those classes. We're going to be, we have 3 required science courses, not just science credits, 3 actual courses.
Yeah.
So, and that gets in the way of
A lot
students
of
being
things.
able to take
Yeah.
other things. So,
Yeah.
we're charged by the state, it's law to create flexible pathways. So having integrated 2 year-long integrated science classes, so that 9th graders take and 10th graders take, and then students that want to really concentrate in the sciences can really, go to town in the 11th and 12th grade. But we've built a really, really solid a basis for students to understand that. Same thing in math.
Yeah.
We have integrated 4, but a very small percentage of our students actually ever get to AP Calc. And it's not because we have so many classes in the way, it's just they're not interested in going that far.
Yeah.
So creating a really strong basis for math understanding, deep math understanding in 9th grade and 10th grade will allow students who want to go on to do that. We'll redesign the courses in 11th grade and 12th grade to do that, but other students, we're just going to make sure that they are proficient.
Yeah.
So, and that extends across all the content areas.
Will language get that continuity back where you can
Well,
take it right in a row?
Right now, yeah, you'd have world language every other day for a year, as opposed to taking, Spanish 1 your first semester of freshman year, and not being able to take Spanish 2 until second semester of your sophomore year.
That will be
later.
fixed.
So it's more consistent time, and it's the same amount of face-to-face instruction. It's just spread over a year. We know, we've learned a lot about the brain and how the brain learns and how adolescents learn in the years since these courses were developed, and it allows even though it's now we kind of kill and drill. It's every day, and it's this march to the Friday before Martin Luther King Day when you've got to be done with that course because that's when the course ends. And now you have the benefit of a year's growth with students. But yeah, there are a lot of assumptions out there that I'll never be able to do because I still have to do earth science and IPC and bio and all that. All of that's being redesigned.
So moving forward, I'm sure you have a plan on how you're going to talk to the students and parents and families, and I'm just,
Well, it's gone out twice to parents and families. I've solicited some feedback. That survey had 3 parents submit questions on that survey. Only 3.
Yeah.
And then 1 student did, and then so we haven't heard a lot, but we will continue to do that. We'll do the program of studies where people will see new courses, and some of this will really impact the rising 9th grade.
Yeah.
But we'll make a commitment. Any student who is bound and determined to take whatever class it is, because they had it in their graduation plan and they're going to be a senior next year, we will make sure that they'll be able to take those courses.
Do you think people would attend an evening discussion about it, like come learn about parents and students, or?
Maybe the 3.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of them was in the audience.
Right.
Here.
So there are a lot of questions. I know we're way behind time, but this does seem important.
Yeah.
So I've got Tom, George, and then Alder.
So, I'm reading that one of the benefits is it allows for increased flexible learning opportunities for independent studies, community-based learning, flexible pathways, et cetera.
Yes.
Do we know that's the case? And what I'm thinking, or is it alternatively, I'm thinking things like internships are often not year-long, but are 3 or 6 month kinds of opportunities, especially community-based learning. So I'm wondering if we do in fact know that there will be more opportunities.
Well, I know that just about every high school in the state uses that schedule. And most of them are beyond us in their move to proficiency. They've incorporated more flexible pathways, more internships, more independent studies. Our students right now are pretty much locked into 4 classes. That's a full-time schedule. You got to take block 1, block 2, block 3, so it's you know, some of these things we could have done with the schedule that we have, but it's, this, well, one of the most important areas is it aligns with our regional schools, so that, you know, right away opens up opportunities. We have dual enrollment classes offered here because our teachers are adjunct professors through CCV. Most of our neighboring schools do not. So when I talked to CCV to make sure that we weren't gonna adversely impact our enrollment in that, and they said no. In fact, you may even start getting students from other schools coming to take classes here. So that's an opportunity. Pre-tech at the Career Center follows the AB rotation. Our students, we've had a really hard time getting kids into those pre-tech programs. The technical center is fine. The actual completed programs is okay. That won't change. And, you know, we guarantee that students will be able to do that. You know, the other schools have switched. Middlebury switched this year to that. Mount A's been following this for a long time. And, you know, we've really struggled with alignment. Almost every year that I've been here, we've had students from other schools ask to take German here because we offer German. And then when they find out what our schedule is, they can't. So, and, you know, I think there are going to be opportunities that we haven't even really considered yet because we haven't been able to.
It sounds like this is very well thought out and very logical. What is the problem that the students are having with this? I mean,
Well, so right now, a student has 4 classes for one semester, and only, unless they have an AB, you know, they're the kids that might have a health class and a PE class that meets every other day, but for the academic classes, they only have 4 classes. That class meets every single day, so there's not a whole lot to juggle. You know what your day's gonna look like between August and January, and then you know what your day's gonna look like between January and June. 4 classes and only 4 classes. And the same with teachers, only teach 3 classes a semester, unless, again, there's the AB thing.
Right.
So this way, they have you know, it's basically, you could say, you have your A-day classes, which will be 3 or 4 per student, and your B-day classes, which would be 3 or 4. And so they're juggling them every other day, so that, you know, it means that, you know, I'm thinking I'm doing my homework for tomorrow's classes, and then I don't have to do that. But, you know, that meets, again, you know, it meets the brain's need for variety and for time between learning and processing time, and not just, oh, I got instruction in this, I'm going to do my homework, I'm going to have a mini quiz tomorrow, and then I'm going to learn something new. And you know, it really, you know, I think it's a schedule that you should have switched to a long time ago.
it's changed.
Yeah, it is.
We all resist it.
So one of the big concerns that I have heard from students at Virgins has been expressed to me from students at Mount Abe and Middlebury. This is all just like people that I know, so it's not like everyone feels this way. Is that students are worried about juggling 8 classes at a time is a big one, because that's a lot of students feel like that's a lot of like different stuff they need to keep track of. That's one of the problems that has been expressed to me from students at Middlebury and Mount Abe.
If they have problems doing it?
Yeah, it's just a lot of stuff to keep track of, and what you have homework for, and what you need to do for what. That might just be a symptom of like adapting these schedules and making them work. I don't really know. Another one is that I'm a little personally a little confused about how the chorus and band would work. And it seems to me, from what you're describing, that students who it would be much more of a commitment to do chorus and band, right? Because it's taking up a class block, and those students would have less opportunity to take other classes.
There are 7 other opportunities.
Yeah, but they have that +1
more in the current schedule. So, I guess, do you have one block of chorus that you do every other day and one block of band you do every other day?
The student could take both band and chorus if they wanted to adjust their schedule that way.
Okay.
They could be in both chorus and band.
And then have
as
an
actual
opportunity.
courses. Or
to-
Kaylin and Sue have made a commitment that they would continue the, you know, kind of the mini switch. So students that wanted to be in band could be in like a mini chorus like they are now.
Mhm.
So I don't know if now is the time to get really down into
Yeah.
the weeds of exactly how it's gonna operate. But are there any more questions generally
But
about this?
the main answer I want to give to George, because you asked what students have a problem with this, is that not many people have really seen this, and it's not necessarily a problem with the change that is being made, because we didn't really know any of the details about that. We just heard that it was happening, and that sort of half information, rumor-based hearing doesn't feel good, especially when students are the one who are going to be primarily affected. I think once it's like explained, a lot of students will be a lot more receptive to it than they are now.
Thank you.
All right, so anything else for our principals? All right, I loved the video, Kathleen, and that you got your kids all published. That's really cool. All right, that brings us to the student report. Back to you, Alder.
The only thing I'm going to talk about today is the passing of Peter Quinn, which impacted the school community a lot. Peter Quinn he did a lot of stuff that meant a lot to a lot of different people. And that's pretty vague, but it's because of how much he did. How much he did, you can't really focus on it. He was a wonderful basketball coach. He provided assistance and real dedication to students that really struggled in school. He was a big part of making the Walden Project run at all. And he will be very missed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's certainly a devastating loss.
I'll just add, I'll give you a little break here. We had a number of folks from CSAC, because obviously he's a clinician working through CSAC that we contract with. So there were 8 to 10 CSAC employees here, just available for students, available for adults, just to be able to talk. We had the library set up as a space for people to come and congregate if they wanted to, several other smaller spaces within the building. I think for the most part, you know, today a lot of people are in disbelief still and still kind of trying to figure it out. There's a celebration of his life on Saturday, 1 p.m. at Kirk Alumni Center, Middlebury College, this coming Saturday, 1 o'clock. That I believe is open to anyone. Thursday night, so the game tonight got canceled, obviously. It was going to be the boys' first home game. The girls' first home game tomorrow night is canceled because they decided they really wanted the first home game to be a boys' game. And there's some plans that will be Thursday. The team Manine and others are working on what that's going to look like, what kind of tribute they're going to pay to Peter Thursday evening. So those are some of the things that are happening. Obviously, we have a lot of students to figure out how we're going to, get them connected with a new counselor, and how we're going to support them in the meantime. Peter obviously spent a lot of time with Walden, helping them function as a group and do lots of group dynamic stuff, and a lot of places to fill in. So as Alder said, it's a significant loss for our school and the community at large, by all means. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder.
Okay, so moving on to board reports, I don't have anything, unless someone has a question for me. I will turn it to you.
I don't have anything either, because
Okay.
that meeting's on Wednesday night, so.
Okay, VSBA unavailable, community engagement, all those notes were attached, but,
Actually, the link here is to the same, information that Sheila
Right.
had in here, which is fine. We're meeting on Thursday, we're gonna sort this information further out, for, more, and I talked with Sue about maybe doing some tabletop conversations that are before one of our February board meeting, to talk about some of the newer ideas. And anyway, that's where we are.
cool.
And the survey link went out too. Yeah.
And
Yep.
we've got 14 responses on the survey, which were the same questions that we had at our community conversation number 2.
Thank you.
Facilities Committee did not meet. We will meet on January 4th. And we will start talking about these things, but probably not until the spring, because we're a little bit later, because we're going to be talking about this, the safety procedures, and to report back to the board on the February, meeting.
It feels like, I don't know what the temperature is in here, but it feels like there's a temperature setback that's working.
Okay, is there a way to maybe adjust that the next time we have a meeting?
Override it? The facilities director, and he said that I could override it if I clicked that button, and it would override for 2 hours, but I didn't.
Our meeting's too long.
I guess where I was going with this, I wonder if the board was so inclined, if we could try to maybe coordinate the board's meeting schedule such with the.
With Heath?
Okay, great.
That was the request I made, he said I could override it right now, and if you saw me walk over there, that's what I was trying to do, sort of hitting it with my
I think this is one of the ongoing tweakings that we're experiencing, right? All right, Finance, anything from Finance Committee? No. Anything from Policy Committee? No. And negotiations?
Just a short, on 11/27, we exchanged final proposals with ANTA and signed 4 articles as tentative agreements. 20 articles remain open at this time. On 12/4 with ANSA, we signed 7 articles as tentative agreements, and the board withdrew 1 proposal. 17 articles remain open. We have meeting dates. We have 4 upcoming for ANTA and 5 for the support.
All right, that brings us to the action items. So I'm looking for a motion on minutes.
I approve.
Second.
Wait, talk.
We approved the minutes of November 26, 2018.
Second that.
Okay. Any conversation or revisions on the minutes? All in favor of approving minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? No. Okay. Bills and directors' orders?
Was that for, Lori was gonna look at it today, and, no. So she wasn't, so I don't know what happened.
I'm not sure where we are, to be perfectly honest, but we're a little
It seems
back.
like
There's
if she was
one
gonna
that I
look at
did
them
and I
today,
haven't
we couldn't
reported
have
on.
even done it tonight, so I'm not sure.
So do we not have, do we have bills and directors' orders that we need to
Thought we
approve
just did
tonight?
that last time.
Are they for November or are they for October?
Okay,
So they would have been done today and Lori didn't do them. So we're gonna have to push it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Next meeting.
all right, I guess we're gonna, they've been paid, right?
Nobody's
No one
looked at them
reviewed
though.
One's looked at
anything.
them, so we
Laura's
should
gonna
not
do it today,
approve them.
but that doesn't,
Okay, so
would
we'll,
have happened today.
we will
just
add
got
that
the announcement 2 days ago.
to
Something seems wrong.
January,
We'll check it out.
November bills. Okay. Approval of capital improvement fund refunding note. I know we got in trouble with this one.
Yes.
Yes.
On a little brief, that's why I followed her out.
Yeah.
Yes.
'Cause she said we could call her, but I said I'll take a stab at
Well,
it
we
first.
did this one.
They lost.
Yeah.
Go
okay.
for
I
it.
think it's the
It's-
use of the term refunding.
Yes.
as
Yeah.
opposed
Can we put a
to
hyphen?
refinancing.
Yes.
So essentially, you're approving the refinancing. Currently, the balance is 22, but 11 will be paid in December, meaning the balance is 11. So you're refinancing that 11, which will then be paid off next year. So
Okay.
that's it.
So we're looking for a motion.
So moved.
Second?
Second, okay. Any conversation about that?
In the future, can we just put a hyphen between the E and the F?
Yes.
So we
I
know
know,
it's
that's the way they write it.
Well, you're
refunding
paying
as
it off
opposed to
in
refunding.
December, so.
All right,
Or
so
refinancing.
all in favor of approving this fund refunding note, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Well, maybe everybody has to sign.
All right, and that,
Yes, everyone signed
Everybody
and
needs
has the
signatures.
clerk. You have
That's
one.
what I thought.
I think it has to be refunded.
so we'll come around for
Okay.
signatures.
Sue, could I move that we approve the financial management questionnaire?
Yes, please.
I would
Is there a
move that.
second?
Second.
Okay. Any questions about this? We already talked about it with Elizabeth. All right, all in favor of approving the internal controls checklist, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, I will sign that. We have some policies up for adoption.
I'll move that we approve all 3 policies. We've looked at them before.
Is there a 2nd?
I'll second.
We only need one, people, only one.
It's a race.
If I may,
Yes, you have a
under
question?
discussion.
Yes.
Because the F-50 records retention references a Vermont statute, I would ask that a copy of the statute be included with the policy.
Okay, okay. All right. Hang on a second.
Okay.
There's not one at the bottom?
It wasn't in what I saw.
There are
I'll
3.
work on it.
There's, check it out, see if it's missing. I don't think it's missing something. I don't think. I think we have
A
all of the
reference to
policy,
it.
the
You mean
legal
the actual
references down at the
policy,
bottom.
or the actual statute?
It, okay, so it lists them,
Yeah.
but it does not spell them out.
That's how all of our policies
They're all
are.
like that,
Really?
though,
Yes.
Yeah, so they're there as a reference so that we can go and find them.
Mm-hmm.
And,
And George, usually if you copy
Right.
what it is and put it into a search,
Mhm.
it'll take you to what
Okay.
it is. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to find what's actually being referenced because it may be 1 or 2 paragraphs,
Right.
but it,
Okay, thank you.
okay, yeah.
All right, any other discussion around those? Okay, all in favor of approving these 3 new policies, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Okay. Action item F is approval of support for the City of Virgin's Stormwater Master Plan.
So, how about this? I recommend, I make a motion that we support the City of Virgin's efforts to achieve grants on behalf of the school district for the Stormwater Master Plan project.
I'll second.
Okay, any discussion? I think that covers it, yeah. We're just,
So we're not committing to paying any money, is
right,
Nope.
what you're saying,
right.
ourselves.
But we're
Approve
giving
the next
them
step of the process.
our blessing to move forward,
Yep.
right? Okay. Any other discussion? Does that, you think that,
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the first step in that is to just see if they can get the plan.
Right.
done.
They need us to, like,
yeah,
the school board supports us going for this grant.
yeah, right. Okay, so all in favor of John's motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Okay. Discussion, board meeting schedule in January. Okay, so, Sheila had added January 7th to the budget schedule, just in following the format from last year. But in actuality, it's too close to really have any feedback, so I think we're gonna nix that one. It was kind of unofficially added anyway. So I don't think we need to meet in January 7th. But we will need 2 meetings, and the problem is that the 28th is too late for us to adopt the warning, because it needs to be 30 days, 25 days, 30 days prior to the annual meeting.
and isn't 21st Martin Luther King Day?
21st, we moved it because it's Martin Luther King Day and there's no school, and we really need to have our administrators at this meeting. So I think the question is there an evening the week of the 21st that we could have a second board meeting in January that would work
Instead of the
for a
28th.
quorum? So we would not have the 7th, we would not have the 28th,
Calendar.
we would keep the 14th, and then we need one more before the 26th, right?
So no 7.
Wasn't this why we moved everything to Wednesday last year?
Probably. Yeah, probably. So Tuesday or Wednesday or
We have
Thursday?
a city council, so I wouldn't be able to make it, but that's still a quorum for you.
I'm
I
sorry,
can do
which day was that?
Tuesday.
The Tuesday, the 22nd is a city council meeting, but I can do 23, 24, 25. Just throwing
I'm
out
with
the
Sheila on
dates
that
I was
one.
told.
23rd or 24th?
23.
23rd?
Not do 24, 100%.
Okay. Anyone, 23rd, going
Good
once?
with the 23rd.
You can't?
No, I'm good with it.
Oh, you're good with 23rd? You're good with 23rd, Christina?
Yep.
George?
I can make it.
Tom, 23rd?
As far as I know.
23rd, 23rd? Okay. I think we have agreement.
At
George?
6 o'clock?
Diana? Okay. Yes, 6 o'clock. Let's not go crazy, Christina.
So the
All right.
14th, the 23rd, and the no 28th.
Just the 14th and the 23rd for January board meetings.
And not the 7th.
Not the 7th, not the 28th, not any other day except for unless you have committee meetings.
I can't edit that, so I guess it's something that,
Yes, Glory will
Glory
change
will
the,
change it.
the district calendar if that's how you have it on yours.
That's how I have it.
Excellent. All right, I'm looking for a motion to go into executive session.
I move that we go into
Second.
executive session for the reasons that we
Inviting-
specified
inviting
earlier.
the
And we would like to invite the superintendent.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.